Welcome to Dracula Harry. Today's adventure: what if Esme Cullen found baby Harry crying in Forks and the Cullens adopted him as their son? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The crying in the clearing. The house on the river road was painted white because Esme had painted it white. She had finished the second coat 3 years and 4 months before the night the basket was found. In a single afternoon, with a brush in each hand and no breath in her chest. And the paint had dried under a yellow August sun while she stood on the lawn and watched it the way a hen watches an egg. Carlyle had come up the drive in his car and had looked at the house and at her and had said only, "It is the right white." He had been right. White was the color she had needed. The forest on every side of the house was so green and so wet and so old that the house had to be the white of a thing not yet ruined by it, the white of a fresh tooth in a dark mouth, the white of a page in a book no one had yet read. She thought of the house, as she pulled on her coat in the hall, as the only thing she had ever made. The hall clock said 11 past 11. The radio in the kitchen was playing, very softly, a station Rosalie liked, and someone with a man's voice was reading the weather for the week ahead. Cold rains, more cold rains, a chance of a clearing on the 3rd. Esme listened with the quarter of her attention that could not help listening to a human voice. She buttoned the coat. The coat was wool the color of moss, and it had been a gift from Alice, and the buttons were horn, and there were 6 of them. And the 3rd one had a chip on its edge from the night Esme had caught it on a branch and not noticed for a week. Carlyle was in the doorway. He had his medical bag in one hand and the keys to the older of the 2 cars in the other, and the hospital pager clipped to the pocket above his heart. He had been a vampire for 346 years and a doctor for 210 of them, and he carried, when he was about to leave for a shift, a particular stillness she had learned to read. 2 intubations and a chest tube in the last hour, he said quietly. They've called for me. I'll be there until at least 6. Go, she said. He did not go. He looked at her in the hall, in the coat, in the moss color of it, and his face did the small private thing it did when he was about to say a thing he had not planned to say. It's November 1st, he said. I know what it is. I can stay. You cannot. 2 intubations and a chest tube. He set his bag down. He took the half step across the hall that closed the distance between them, and he put the back of his hand against her cheek briefly in the way that meant nothing and meant everything. She let her cheek be touched. Walk well, he said. I will. Come back. I always do. He picked up the bag. He went. The screen door creaked at its top hinge, and the car started in the drive, and the headlights swept across the kitchen window in a long, pale arc. And then the sound of the engine moved down the river road and was gone, and the house was as quiet as a vampire's house ever is, which is to say it hummed with 5 separate breathings of beings that did not need to breathe. She walked through the kitchen on her way to the back door. Rosalie was at the sink with a cloth and her wrench. She did not look up. She did not need to. Rosalie tracked the family by sound the way other people tracked it by sight, and she had Esme's footstep memorized down to the millimeter. Don't go past the ridge, Rosalie said. The wrench clinked into the sink. I never do. You did in September. Emmett heard you. Emmett hears wrong half the time. Not about you, he doesn't. Esme paused at the back door with her hand on the latch, and she looked at the back of her daughter's gold head and felt the small, accurate love that was the particular shape of loving Rosalie. Loving Rosalie was loving a thing with a fence around it, and the fence was the love. I will not go past the ridge, she said. Good, Rosalie said. The wrench clinked again. Take a coat. I have one. Take the moss one, it's the warmest. I am wearing the moss one. Good, Rosalie said again, and then she did look up briefly, and her eyes were the gold of a thing that had been hungry an hour ago and was no longer hungry, and she said, Esme. Yes. It's November 1st. I know what it is. All right, Rosalie said. Walk well. Esme stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped 2 hours and 11 minutes before she left the house, but the forest behind Forks did not know it yet. Water still moved through the moss in slow, unhurried lines. Cedar boughs released their tithe of drops. The whole woodland leaned and dripped and breathed. She walked north. She walked north most nights. It was not a route so much as a current she rode. The path she had cut for herself over the 4 years they had lived in this house ran out behind the kitchen, between 2 leaning hemlocks, down through a fern-choked draw, and up the long shoulder of ridge where the trees grew older. Beyond the ridge the land opened into clearings, salmonberry thickets, the wide silent meadows the elk used in summer. Beyond the meadows the boundary line lay, the one Carlyle had drawn for them on a map with a soft pencil and a softer voice. Do not cross. She would not cross it. She only walked toward it. She was, in human reckoning, 26 years old. She had been 26 for 97 years. The number had stopped meaning anything to her some decades back, the way a calendar stops meaning anything to a tree. What still meant something was the date, November 1st, the day after the day they buried him. She had been 17 and a half. The baby had lived 2 days and a part of a third. They had wrapped him in the blanket she had stitched in the 8th month, the blue one with the white edge, the only blue thing in the whole house, and they had put him in a box that her husband had built without consulting her, and they had set the box in the ground in the Catholic plot at the edge of the town, and the priest had said words she did not hear because she was watching a robin on the fence and thinking that no one had told the robin. That had been 103 years ago. She walked, and the forest moved around her in the way a forest moves around a walker who knows it. It did not part for her. It did not close behind her. It simply was, and she was simply in it. And the relation of those 2 things was a relation of 2 old neighbors who have stopped saying good morning because the morning is theirs already. She had been born in a small town in Ohio. She had married in that town, a man with a heavy hand and a heavier voice, and she had lost a baby to a fever, and she had thrown herself in the autumn after, off the cliff at the edge of the next town over. She remembered the cliff in a way she remembered nothing else from her human life. The wind in her dress, the way her shoes had come off in the air, the cold, full breath she had taken just before the water, which had been the last breath of her life and the first honest one. They had laid her out in the moor. Carlyle had come up the stairs from his shift and had walked the row of the dead, the way he walked every row of every dead, and had stopped at her, and had heard, very faintly, a heart still doing the slow last fluttering it does when it has been broken but not yet stopped, and he had carried her up to the attic and turned her, and 3 days later she had opened her eyes and seen his face and known, before she knew anything else, that there was kindness somewhere in the world after all. That had been 71 years ago. She walked. The path bent left where the wind had taken down a hemlock the previous winter. She stepped over the trunk without thinking. Beneath her bare feet, she walked barefoot in the woods because the soles of her shoes wore unevenly and Rosalie would catch her at it. The moss was cold and yielding and full of architecture. She felt every plate of it. She catalogued, as she walked, the things her senses gave her. The smell of cedar and salmonberry and the metallic green of fern. The smell of a deer that had passed through here 4 hours ago. The smell of an owl pellet from last week. The smell of the river still half a mile north. The wet sound of the moss. The dry scratch of something small moving under the ferns. The wind in the upper branches that was not wind so much as the trees breathing. These were the sounds she knew. The sound she heard at 12 minutes past midnight was not one of them. She stopped. She held very still in the way that nothing alive holds still, that only a thing with no need to breathe can hold, and she listened. It came again, thin, high, a child, crying. She did not move for 31 seconds. The mind that had walked these woods every night for 4 years was running through possibilities the way a librarian runs through cards, a bird that imitated, A bobcat kit. A trick of acoustics, throwing the cry of a coyote pup across the ridge. A hiker's child, but no hiker had been on the ridge today. No human had been on the ridge today. The wind would have brought the scent. The cry came a third time, and this time she knew it. She had heard that cry once before, in a small wooden house with blue curtains in Columbus, Ohio, in the autumn of 1879. The cry of a human infant. She moved. She did not run. Running was easy. Running, she had learned in her first decade, was the wrong response to almost everything. She walked at the speed of a deer at full alarm, which was faster than any horse and quieter than the wind in the ferns, and she crossed the half-mile of forest between her and the sound in 2 minutes and 14 seconds. The clearing lay at the foot of the boundary ridge. It was one of the clearings she knew. A salmonberry ring, an old stump in the center, ferns at the edges, a flat patch of moss where the elk slept in August. She had stood at this exact clearing 7 times in her life. None of the previous 7 times had there been a basket in it. She stopped at the tree line. She made herself stop. She had a rule about clearings. The rule was that you stopped at the edge and looked and listened and smelled before you stepped into one, because the world was full of traps that looked like gifts, and a vampire walking into a clearing was a thing for which the world had developed a great many bad answers over the centuries. She held herself at the tree line and she looked. The basket sat in the center of the moss, near the stump but not on it. It was a small thing, a woven willow basket of the kind a farmer's wife might use for eggs, with 2 handles and a lining of pale cloth. A blanket lay over the top, folded back, and within the blanket lay a child. He was perhaps a year old. He was thin in the way infants are thin, all soft bones and impossible eyelashes. His face was wet. His mouth was open. His eyes were closed. He was crying with the exhausted, automatic crying of a child who had cried for a long time and could no longer remember why. There was no one else. She knew this in the first second. She had been listening with everything she was for 12 minutes, and she had not heard a single human heart, a single human breath, a single human footfall within a mile of the clearing. There was no track in the wet moss. There was no trail through the salmonberry. The basket sat in the center of the clearing as if the clearing had grown around it. She tasted the air. It was the only sense she still distrusted. Carlyle had taught her to distrust it. Scent lied less than sight, he said, but it lied in the worst ways. She tasted the air now and she found wrongness. She did not have another word for it. The child smelled like a child. He smelled of milk and salt and the particular sweet damp of a wet blanket, and beneath those smells he smelled of a human, blood and skin, and the clean architecture of a body still being built. That part of the scent was familiar. She had passed within 20 feet of a human child 4 times in her unlife, and had not failed any of them. She would not fail this one, but beneath the human smell was a second smell, and that was the smell she could not name. It was not blood. It was not the fragrance of any animal she had encountered in 97 years. It was not the scent of another vampire, and it was not the scent of the wolves she sometimes caught wind of past the boundary line. It was a smell with a shape. It moved. It seemed to come from the child and from the basket and from the air around them both. It was the smell of a smell on a smell layered, almost a sound rather than a fragrance, and the part of her mind that had taught itself piano in 1924 and had taught itself silkscreen printing in 1947, and had taught itself the difference between 43 species of fern in the last 4 years now reached for this scent and found nothing in itself that matched. She thought, with the calm that was the gift and the curse of her kind, I do not know what this is. She thought immediately after, I do not care. The child cried. She turned her head once deliberately toward the boundary ridge. The line ran 100 yards past the clearing, up the slope, through a stand of red cedar that had been growing since before any white person had walked the river road. She could not see the line because the line was not a thing the eye could see. It was a thing two old men had drawn on a piece of paper in 1936, and the paper had been signed in pen, and the pen had been Carlyle's. On the other side of the line was a tribe whose grandfathers had agreed not to come south, in exchange for the Cullens not coming north. The agreement had held for 46 years. It would hold tonight. She wondered very briefly whether someone had carried the child across the line and put him down here on purpose, whether the basket was a gift for her family or a problem for her family, and whether the difference mattered. It did not matter. The child cried. She stepped into the clearing. She crossed the moss in 5 steps. She crouched at the basket. She did not yet reach for him. She looked. The blanket had been folded with care. The hand that had folded it had taken the time to tuck the corner beneath the child's shoulder, so the wet outside would not touch his skin. The basket was lined with a cloth that had been a pillowcase once before it had been cut and stitched into a lining, and there was a stain on the corner of the pillowcase that had been a stain of tea or a stain of something almost like blood that someone had tried and failed to remove. There was no note. There was no token. There was no name. There was on his forehead a scar. It cut down through the soft new hair above his right eye. It was the shape of a lightning bolt, of the kind a child might draw. It was, she thought, perhaps a week old. The skin was still pink at the edges. The line of it was clean, as if the cut had been made by something thinner than a knife. She had seen, in the long arithmetic of her unlife, a great deal of damage done to small bodies. She had seen the marks of belts and bottles and fathers. She had seen burns and bites and the round bruises of fingertips. The mark on this child's forehead was not any of those things. It was a wound that had not been made by any object she could imagine. She did not file it away. She did not have time. The child was crying and she was crouched there, looking, and she thought of nothing at all, which was a thing she had not been able to do for 97 years. She lifted him. She did it slowly, with both hands. She slid one hand beneath his head and one beneath the curve of his back, the way a young mother in the Columbus ward had been shown how to do, the way Esme herself had been shown how to do by the nurse with the red hair whose name she could no longer remember in 1879. She lifted him out of the basket, and the blanket came with him, and his head settled into the crook of her arm. He stopped crying. He stopped between one breath and the next, the way a clock stops, mid-tick. His mouth was still open. His eyelashes were still wet. He opened his eyes. The eyes were green. She had not been prepared for that. She did not know why she had expected blue, only that she had, in the half-second before he opened them, expected blue. They were green like the underside of a fern leaf, like the river water in the shallows at dusk, like a stone she had picked up on a beach in Maine in 1908 and carried in her pocket for a year. They were the green of a thing that had grown, not a thing that had been chosen. He looked at her. He did not look at her face the way a child looks at a face. He looked at her, the whole of her, the way a person looks at a person they have been waiting for. It was not the look of a child who had been frightened and is no longer frightened. It was the look of a child who had been crying because there had been no one to cry to, and now there was someone, and the crying had stopped because the purpose of crying had been served. She felt beneath her sternum a thing she had not felt in 103 years. She let it pass through her without naming it. Names cost time. She did not have time. She stood up. She held the child against her chest. She had not in 3 minutes taken a breath. She found that she did not need to. The thirst that had been the third movement in the symphony of her existence for 97 years had gone silent. It was not gone. She knew the trick the body played, that the absence of a sound was sometimes only the ear adjusting, but for now it was silent. She held the warm, small shape of him against the cold marble of her body, and she felt his heart beat against her ribs, twice as fast as a human heart should beat, the way infant hearts beat, and she thought, "He is alive. He is alive and he is here and there is no one else. She turned in the clearing once, all the way around slowly. She listened with everything she was. She listened for a footfall in the salmonberry. She listened for breath in the cedar. She listened for the rustle of a person who had set this basket down and was waiting to see who came. She heard nothing. There was nothing. Whoever had left him had left, and they had not left a track, and they had not left a name. She looked down at him. He was looking up at her still. His mouth was no longer open. He was breathing, slow now, his small hand. She could see the hand now where it had been bunched in the blanket, open at the wrist, 4 fingers and a thumb. The nails of them so small she could not believe they had been grown by a thing of this size. The chapter 2. Esme carries him home. Rosalie did not move out of the doorway. She stood with her hands still damp from the sink and her face still arranging itself. And Esme stood on the porch with the child against her shoulder, and the night air came in around them both, cold and wet and full of the river. The kitchen light cut a yellow rectangle out of the dark and laid it across Esme's chest, and across the chest of the child, and across the woven willow of the basket under her elbow. Neither woman spoke. The child slept. Behind Rosalie, Alice came down the stairs the rest of the way. She came 2 steps at a time and then 1 step at a time, and then she came to a stop on the bottom step with her hand on the newel post and her gold eyes fixed on the bundle in Esme's arms. She did not speak either. Alice, who spoke for a living, who narrated her visions while they were still arriving, who told you what you were going to say before you said it, was silent. Her mouth was open the same 1/4 of an inch that Rosalie's mouth was open. She looked, for a half-second, very young. Esme tilted her head a degree to the right, toward Rosalie in the way that meant, "Let me in." Rosalie stepped aside. Esme crossed the threshold. The screen door swung shut behind her on its hinge, and the click of the latch was the only sound in the house for the next 1.5 seconds. She walked past Rosalie. She walked past Alice on the stairs. She walked into the kitchen and stood in the center of it under the warm yellow lamp and looked down at the child, and then she looked up, and Rosalie was at her left elbow and Alice was at her right elbow, and neither of them had decided yet what their faces were going to do. "Esme," said Alice. The word came out small and not all the way certain. "His name," said Esme very quietly, "is something I do not know yet." Alice's hand went to her mouth. "You found him." "Yes. In the woods. The clearing under the boundary ridge. There wasn't anyone with him. There wasn't a track. Alice closed her eyes. The vision came again, or another vision came, or the same vision came at a sharper resolution. Esme could see it move behind her eyelids, the way water moves under a thin sheet of ice. After 3 seconds, Alice opened her eyes and said, in a voice that had become exactly the voice of Alice again, "Carlyle is on his way. He left the hospital 7 minutes ago. Edward is 2 miles out. He's running." "Running?" He heard the heartbeat. Esme nodded. She had expected as much. Edward did not run inside the house, and he did not run on the river road, and he did not run when he was bored, because Edward had a horror of doing anything that looked, from any angle, undignified. But Edward could hear a heart from a great distance, and he could read a mind from a slightly less great distance, and the two of them together had been adding up since the moment the heart had crossed the property line. He was running because he was afraid, and Edward Cullen running because he was afraid was a thing that had happened in 70 years, perhaps 4 times. "Sit down," said Rosalie. Esme looked at her. "You've been standing for hours," said Rosalie. "You're going to hold him better sitting. Sit down." She said it the way Rosalie said all the most important things, which was as if she were issuing an order about a wrench, and Esme found herself, before she had decided to, sitting in the chair at the head of the kitchen table with the child still in her arms. Rosalie pulled the second chair around so that it sat at Esme's elbow, and Rosalie sat in it, and Rosalie put one hand on the edge of the table and the other on the back of the chair behind Esme, and she did not say anything else. She looked at the child. Alice came around the other side and sat on the floor at Esme's knee, the way she had sat on the floor at Esme's knee on the first night Alice had ever entered this family in 1950 in a kitchen in a different state. Alice put one hand on Esme's wrist. The hand was small and cold and certain. "He's beautiful," said Alice. "He is," said Esme. "He has a scar. He has a scar. There's something on him. I can almost see it. It's like—" Alice tilted her head. "I can't see his future. I can see ours. I can see Carlisle's when he gets here. I can see Edward's. I can see what Rosalie's about to say. But the child, he's a hole, like a hole in a picture." "Yes," said Esme. "He has a strange scent." "I can't smell his future at all," said Alice. "Esme, I have never not been able to see a future." "I will not put him down," said Esme. Alice did not look offended. She looked at Esme for a long moment, and then she pressed her cheek briefly against Esme's knee and she said, "You don't need to, he's yours." Rosalie's hand on the chair behind Esme tightened a fraction. The front door opened. It opened without anyone having touched it. Edward, who had a horror of doing undignified things, had passed through the front door at a speed that was not far short of his top speed, and the door had taken approximately the kindness he had given it, which was almost none. It hit the wall and bounced once on its hinges. He came into the kitchen with his hair wild from the running and his coat still on and his eyes the gold of a man who had hunted yesterday and would not hunt for 10 more days, the safest gold he could ever be. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at Esme. He looked at the child. He did not say anything. He was reading her mind. She let him. It was the agreement they had made many years ago, on a porch in Wisconsin, that he would not push into the private rooms, but that the public rooms were his to come into whenever he wanted. Now Esme opened every door of every public room she had. She let him see the clearing and the basket and the lifting and the eyes that had opened. And she let him see Rosalie at the sink and Carlisle in the hall with his medical bag. And she let him see the wolf thing across the river. And she let him see her standing on the porch in the cold air thinking, "You are mine." Edward closed his own eyes for a second. When he opened them, he had stopped breathing. He stood very still in the kitchen doorway, the way only a vampire can stand still, and he looked at his mother with the look of a son who has just understood in a single instant the entire shape of his mother's grief. "Esme," he said, "I know. You walked a mile with him through wet woods. Yes, you did not put him down. Number, you will not put him down. Number, he came into the kitchen. He came slowly. He came at the speed of a man approaching a thing he is afraid to startle. He stopped at the side of the chair opposite Rosalie. He looked at the child for a long time without speaking. He bent his head fractionally, the way he bent his head over a piano keyboard when he was about to begin a piece he had not played in a long time and was deciding which fingering to use. "He is dreaming," Edward said. Esme's head came up. "He is dreaming," Edward said again. "I can hear it. I can hear him." Rosalie said, "What is he dreaming?" Edward did not answer for some seconds. His face moved through a series of expressions that did not belong to a face that had been still for 70 years. Esme had seen him angry. She had seen him sad. She had seen him, twice in his unlife, joyful. She had never seen him look the way he looked now. It was not any of those things. It was the face of a man listening to a language he had never heard and recognizing somehow that what he was hearing was a prayer. "A woman with red hair," Edward said. "She is holding him. She is saying his name. The name is—" He stopped. He listened. "His name is Harry." Esme breathed in for the first time in 5 minutes. The breath was small. It carried the scent of him into her again. "Harry," she said. "She is saying it over and over. She is putting him down. There is a—" Edward winced. "There is a green light. She is between him and the light. She is—" He stopped. "She is dead," he said. The kitchen was silent. "He is 1 year old," Edward said. He saw his mother die last week. He has been carried in the cold for a long time. He was set down in the clearing tonight by a man who did not stay. The man wore a long beard and the man's hands shook. The man said the words, "I am sorry, and I am sorry, and I am sorry," and then he was gone. The child has been dreaming the green light ever since. Alice's hand had not left Esme's wrist. It tightened now. "Edward," said Esme. "Yes. Stay with the dream. Stay with him a little longer. Tell me when it changes." "Yes." He stayed. He stood at the side of the chair with his head bent and his eyes nearly closed and his face in the listening shape, and Esme held the child, and Rosalie did not move, and Alice did not move, and a minute went by, and another minute, and another. Outside, the wind in the cedars rose and fell. Inside, the warm yellow light of the kitchen lamp lay on the four of them and on the child and on the basket on the floor at Esme's foot. The clock above the stove ticked. After 3 minutes, Edward straightened. "It changed," he said. "What does he dream now?" "He dreams a sweater," Edward said. "The color of moss. He dreams that the sweater smells of the river and of cedar and of a thing he has never smelled before. He dreams that the sweater is the safest thing in the world. He dreams that the sweater is holding him." Esme could not speak. "Mother," said Edward very quietly, "he thinks the sweater is the safest thing in the world." Rosalie made a sound. It was not a sob. Rosalie did not sob. It was the sound a vampire makes when a thing has happened that she will not let herself cry about because the crying would cost too much. And so it comes out as a small, dry click in the throat, and then it is gone. She got up from her chair. She walked the 4 steps across the kitchen to the refrigerator. She opened it. She closed it. She opened it again. She did not appear to know that she was doing this. After a few seconds, she shut it firmly and turned around and walked back to Esme's chair and sat down again. "I am going to drive to the store," she said. Esme looked at her. "I am going to drive to the store and I am going to buy formula and diapers and a bottle and the thing that goes on the end of the bottle and a cap that fits an infant's head," Rosalie said. "I am going to do this in the next 30 minutes. I am going to come back with everything we need for tonight. Carlyle can do the medical part. I will do the rest." She paused. She looked at Esme. Her face had finally arranged itself. It was the face she had worn the first night she had carried Emmett down out of the woods of Tennessee in 1935, the face she had worn when she had pulled him from the bear and decided he was hers to save. Esme had not seen that face on her daughter in 47 years. "I will go with you," said Alice, who had stood up. "I know what brand." "Of course you do." "Esme," said Alice, "do you want anything?" Esme looked down at the child in her arms. "A name plate," she said. "A small one, the kind you put on a hospital crib, white." Alice nodded once. "Edward," said Rosalie. "I am staying," said Edward. "All right." Rosalie put her hand on Esme's shoulder briefly and then on the crown of the child's head very lightly with the back of one knuckle. The child did not wake. Rosalie's hand lingered there for half a second longer than it needed to. "We will be back in 26 minutes," said Alice. They went. The screen door creaked at the top hinge. The car started in the drive. The car backed out and turned and went down the river road. And after 30 seconds the sound of it was gone, and the house was the 4 of them again, and Edward and Esme and the child, and the basket on the floor. The clock above the stove ticked. Edward sat down in Rosalie's chair. "Carlyle is 15 minutes out," he said. "Yes. Jasper is on his way back. Alice told him he's coming in from the west and he'll come in the back door. Emmett is with him." "Yes." "Esme." "Yes. There is a thing I have to tell you." He sat with his hands on his knees and his head bent the same way it had been bent over the dream of the child. And Esme waited, because Edward did not say there is a thing I have to tell you unless there was a thing he had to tell you, and the way to receive a thing from Edward was to wait. I have read the minds of 3,000 human beings in 70 years. he said. There is a category of mind that I have never been able to read. It is not common. It is not rare either. It is a kind of mind that has a smoothness to it, a thing across the surface that pushes me back out. The man with the shaking hands and the long beard who set the basket down in the clearing tonight had that kind of mind. I could not see him. I could only see him through the child's eyes. Was he the father? He was a stranger to the child until tonight. He was someone who knew the woman with the red hair. Was she that kind of mind? Yes, I could only see her through the child's memory. Esme, the child, has the same kind of mind. Esme looked down at Harry. He was sleeping with one cheek against the wool of her sweater and his small fist open at the wrist. His breath came at the small, fast, steady rate that infant breath comes. He was a year old. He was warm. He was not the kind of mind she had been told vampires inherited, the mind that buzzed and chittered and demanded. He was the kind of mind a mother held. "You cannot read him," she said. "I can hear him dream," Edward said. "That is different. The dream is a kind of broadcast. He cannot hide it because he does not know how. When he wakes up, I will not be able to hear his thoughts, only what he dreams." All right. It is the same with him as it was with the woman who held him and said his name. It is the same with him as it was with the man who put the basket down. There is a category of human being, Esme, that I have not been able to read, and they are connected. I have met 3 of them in my unlife. They were all of them connected. There is a category. He had said the word as if it ought to mean something. "Edward," Esme said, "what do you think the category is?" He looked at her for a long moment. His face moved through a thing she had not seen on his face before. It was a kind of bracing, the kind a man does before he says a sentence he is not sure he believes. "I do not know yet," he said, "but Carlyle will. Carlyle has met more of them than I have." "Has he?" "He has not told us about them. I have seen the memory in his head twice when he did not know I was looking. He met one in 1622. He met another in 1701. He met a third in 1859 in London. They were the same kind of mind. They could do things. They could, Esme, they could do things that vampires cannot do. They could change the color of a stone. They could close a wound. They could move objects across a room without touching them." Esme did not say anything for 10 seconds. She looked down at the child in her arms. The lightning-shaped scar lay clean and pink against the soft skin and the fine hair. The fist at her chest opened and closed once as if he was dreaming a hand opening and closing. The kitchen lamp warmed the round of his cheek. "He is 1 year old," she said. "Yes. He cannot move a stone. Not yet. He cannot close a wound. He was carried into a clearing by a man with shaking hands and set down on the moss and left there to die," she said very softly. "If he could do those things, Edward, he would have done them. He is a child. He is a child who has lost his mother and has been left in the cold. Whatever he is that first." "Yes," Edward said, "and we are going to keep him." Edward did not look surprised. "Yes," he said, "I know we are. You know." "I have spent the last 7 minutes inside the way you are holding him," said Edward. "I have heard, Mother, the way you are thinking the word mine. There is not a person in this family who can say no to that, and there is not a person in this family who is going to try." She did not weep. She had not, in 71 years as a vampire, been able to weep, because vampires do not have the water for it. The thing that happened in her chest when Edward said the word mother was the thing that had happened in her chest the moment she had lifted the child in the clearing, and it was the thing that would happen in her chest a great many times in the years to come, and she let it pass through her without naming it. The back door opened. Jasper came in first, with Emmett behind him. They had come up through the kitchen garden, and they had taken their boots off on the porch, which Jasper always did and Emmett never did. They came into the kitchen and they stopped, both of them in the doorway, and they looked at the woman in the chair and the child in her arms and the basket on the floor. And Jasper, who could read the emotional weather of a room the way a sailor reads a sky, did not say anything for some seconds. "Oh," he said finally. Yes, said Edward. Oh, Esme, Jasper said. He did not come any closer. He stood with his shoulder against the door jamb and his hands open at his sides, and the thing he was doing, she felt it begin almost at once, was a thing he had done for her perhaps a dozen times in the years she had known him. He was thinning out the air. He was reaching into the room with his gift, and he was lifting the sharp edges off the feelings in it, the way you lift the sharp edges off the rim of a glass with a stone. The fear in the room got a little softer. The tightness in Esme's shoulders got a little softer. The child slept. Thank you, Esme said. He doesn't know me yet, said Jasper. When he wakes up he will be afraid. I will be in the next room. Jasper. Yes. Stay. Jasper looked at her. His gold eyes did the thing they did when he was considering whether to disagree with something Esme said, which was almost never. After a moment he nodded once. He came the rest of the way into the kitchen. He stood at the wall opposite Edward. He did not speak. He did not need to. Emmett came past him and crossed the kitchen and crouched down beside Esme's chair so that his face was level with the child's face. Emmett was a great deal of vampire. He was 6 feet and 4 inches, and he was very wide across the shoulders, and he had a voice you could feel through a wall, and he had, in the long unlife behind him, broken more furniture than the rest of them combined. He crouched at her chair now with his hands on his own knees, and he did not touch the child because Emmett, of all of them, knew what his hands were and what his hands were not for. He looked at the child for a long time. He's awfully little, he said. Yes, said Esme. He's awfully little to be out at night. Yes. Whoever left him there is going to want to have a conversation with me, said Emmett in the same voice he used to discuss the weather. No, said Esme. Whoever left him there is going to leave us alone because we are going to keep him, and whatever they were trying to accomplish by leaving him in a clearing in the wet woods in November will have been accomplished, in a way they did not expect. Emmett looked at her. He laughed very quietly, the deep round laugh that did not carry beyond the kitchen. All right, Mom, he said. All right. He stood up. He walked around behind her chair. He put one hand on the back of it, the way Rosalie had put one hand on the back of it earlier, and he stood there with his palm flat on the wood, and Esme could feel through the wood the small steady thing that was Emmett's hand on her chair, and she understood that her oldest son was not going to leave the kitchen until the child was safe in a crib, and the matter was settled, and she understood also that he had already decided the matter was settled, because that was what Emmett did. The headlights of Carlyle's car swept across the kitchen window in a long arc. He's here, said Edward, unnecessarily. The car door opened and closed. Footsteps on the gravel, footsteps on the porch. The front door opened and the wind came in around the doorframe, and Carlyle came in with his bag in his hand and his coat over his arm and his eyes already on the kitchen. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Esme. He looked at the child. He set the bag down on the kitchen table without taking his eyes off either of them. Hello, he said, very gently, the way he said hello to patients he was about to spend a long time with. Hello, Carlyle, I would like to examine him. Yes, I would like you to stay holding him. Yes, I would like also to look at his forehead. Yes, Carlyle came around the table. He set his bag on the chair beside her. He opened it. The metal latch clicked, the way the metal latch on a doctor's bag clicks in every memory she had of being examined, the way it had clicked in the Columbus ward in 1879 when the doctor had bent over her own son and had looked at her, just for a second, and had not said anything, and she had known from the not saying everything she was going to need to know. She watched Carlyle take a small light out of the bag. She watched him take, also, a small mirror, the kind they used to look at the soft places of an infant's mouth. She watched him sit down in the chair where Rosalie had been sitting and bend, and look at the child the way Carlyle looked at children, which was as if every child were a complete and separate book he had not yet been allowed to read. Hello, little one, Carlyle said. The child did not wake. "He is healthy," said Carlyle after a moment. "He is undernourished, but he is not in danger. He is warm, his heart is good, his lungs are good, his breathing is good. I would estimate that he is 14 or 15 months old. There is bruising on his shoulder that is perhaps 8 days old, the shape of a hand, but it is healing. There is the scar on his forehead which I would like to look at more closely." He moved the light very carefully over the fine new hair above the right eye. He held very still for 10 seconds. He set the light down. He sat back in the chair. He did not say anything for a long time. "Carlyle," said Esme. "Yes." "What is it?" He looked at her. His face had become the face it became when he was about to say a true thing that was going to be hard for the person hearing it. It was a face she had loved for 71 years. "I have seen this kind of scar before," he said. "Twice. Once in London in 1859 and once in Edinburgh in 1701. The mark is consistent with a thing I have not spoken about in this house because I have not had reason to. I am going to need to make a phone call to a man whose name I have not said aloud in this country, and then I am going to need to sit down with all of you and tell a story I have not told. I will do that tomorrow morning. Tonight, the child stays with you and the family stays with him, and we do not yet make any decisions." "All right," said Esme. "Esme." "Yes." "Are you certain you wish to keep him?" She looked at Carlyle. She looked at Edward, at Jasper, at Emmett behind her, at the empty chair where Rosalie would sit when she returned, and at the place on the floor where Alice would sit at her knee. She looked down at the child sleeping against her chest with one fist closed on the wool of her sweater. "I am certain," she said. Carlyle nodded. "Then we will find a way," he said. And the way Carlyle said the word "find" was the way he had said it the night he had carried her up from the morgue and put her down on the table in the attic. It was the word with which he had begun every long, careful, patient act of mending in his 346 years of unlife, and Esme heard the word now, and understood that her family had not, in fact, even taken the vote yet, and that the vote was nevertheless already over. Outside, on the river road, Rosalie's car came back up the drive. Chapter 2. In Chapter 3. The Cullen family decides the vote was taken at 4:08 in the morning. By that hour the child had eaten twice from the bottle Rosalie had brought back from the store, had been changed twice, had slept in Esme's arms the entire intervening time, and had woken once to look at the ceiling fan as if it were a thing he was prepared to forgive. Carlyle had drawn 3 vials of blood. Carlyle had counted 3 vials of blood. Carlyle had drawn 3 vials of blood because the first 2 had unsettled him, and he had needed a third in order to be sure the first 2 had not been a mistake of his own. He had not yet said what they had told him. He had asked, instead, that the family come to the dining table at 4. They came. Carlyle sat at the head. Esme sat at his right hand, with the child in her arms. Rosalie sat at Esme's right and Emmett at Rosalie's right. Alice sat at Carlyle's left and Jasper next to her, and Edward at the foot of the table. The dining table was a long rectangle of dark cherry wood that Esme had refinished herself in the spring of 1979, and the lamp above it was a thing Esme had hung in the spring of 1980 and had hated for 1 week and loved ever since. And the chairs at it were 8 in number, and they had never, in 4 years, all been used at the same time. Tonight 7 of them were used. The 8th one was at the far end, opposite Carlyle, and it sat empty because the 8th person had not yet arrived. He would arrive in 5 hours. None of them knew that yet except Alice, who had seen him with great clarity at 3:11 and had not said anything because Alice had learned to let Carlyle speak first when Carlyle was about to speak. Carlyle laid his hands flat on the table. "I am going to tell you a story," he said. "Then we will vote." He began. In the year 1622, in the second winter after I had come back across the channel from the Italian study, I was practicing medicine in a small town outside Cambridge. I had been a vampire for 41 years at that point. I had learned the discipline of the diet. I had learned to be useful to humans. I had not yet learned that there were categories of humans about which the literature of medicine, the literature of philosophy, and the literature of the church had all simultaneously agreed to be silent. I learned this that winter because I was called to attend a boy who had fallen from a tree. He paused. He looked at the lamp. He looked back at the table. The boy was 8 years old. He had broken his arm in 3 places. He should have died of shock and the bleeding, and he had not. His mother brought me to him and asked me to set the bone, and I set the bone, and as I set it I asked the question I always asked, which was, how is it that the child has not died? The mother did not answer. She did not look at me. She looked at her son. The son looked at his arm. The son said, "It will be well, mother, it will be well, you know it will be well." And then I watched over the course of the next 4 minutes, the bleeding in his arm stop and the bruise on his cheek go pale, and the broken bone shift, very slightly beneath the skin, into a posture it had not been in when I had set it. I asked the mother what I had seen. The mother told me. I gave her my word that I would not repeat what she had told me, and I did not repeat it for 360 years. I am repeating it tonight. The kitchen clock ticked. There exists in the human population a recessive lineage, Carlyle said. It has been with us as long as the rest of us and probably longer. It does not breed true in every generation. It can leap 2 and 3 and even 4 generations and then surface in a child whose parents had no inkling. It can be born to a family that has produced it for 30 unbroken generations. The people of this lineage are physiologically human. They breathe, they bleed, they age, they eat, they reproduce. They die of the things humans die of. They are not a separate species. They are a variant of the same species. The variant is the capacity present from birth to do things with the will that the rest of humanity does only with the hands. He looked at Edward. The kind of mind you cannot read, he said. Edward did not nod. He did not need to. In the 17th century, Carlyle continued, they were called the cunning folk in England, the Speakreeft on the Saxon coast, the Brujos in Spain, the Kahuna in the islands of the Pacific, and a great many other things in a great many other places. They did not yet, in 1622, have a single name for themselves. By the time I met the second one, in Edinburgh in 1701, they had organized. They called themselves, in English, wizards. The men were wizards and the women were witches, and the children were the same word in both cases, and the word was magic-born. They had a school in Scotland. They had a school in France. They had a school in Bulgaria, and a school in Japan, and a school in Brazil, and a school in Egypt that had been founded in the 6th century before the Common Era. They had a government of a sort. They had laws, they had a court system, they had a postal service that used owls. Emmett made a sound. Owls, owls. Carlyle, I love you, but owls. Owls. Emmett sat back. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at his wife. He shook his head once and did not say anything else, which was, for Emmett, a kind of agreement. The third one I met, Carlyle said, was a man in London in 1859. His name was Albus, and he had a brother named Aberforth. They were 16 and 14 years old. Their father was in prison for a crime that the wizarding court had handled badly. Their sister was injured in a way that wizard medicine could not mend. I met them because their mother had called for a non-wizard physician, against the advice of her husband, on the theory that wizards had failed her family and humans might not. I did what I could. I did not stay long. The older boy was the most clearly brilliant child I had ever met in my life, and the younger boy was the most clearly decent one, and I went away from them with the strong impression that the older one was going to do enormous things, and the younger one was going to make him pay for them. I have followed both of them at a distance for 123 years. The older one is now the headmaster of the school in Scotland. The younger one runs a tavern in a village near the school. They are still brothers. They no longer speak. He paused. I am going to telephone the younger one in the morning. The table was quiet. The reason I am going to telephone the younger one and not the older one, Carlyle said, is that the older one is a politician, and the younger one is a man who has spent 80 years deliberately refusing to be a politician. And the difference matters very much when one is asking for help that one would prefer not to be a matter of public record. He looked at Esme. The child you have brought into this house, he said, is a wizard. He is a magic-born child. The mark on his forehead is the residue of an attempted curse of the worst kind a wizard can cast on another wizard. The fact that he survived it at the age of 1 year means one of two things. Either he is a child of unusual native magical ability, or he is the recipient of an act of protective magic that I have read about exactly 3 times in 3 centuries, and that I have always assumed was a thing the wizards told themselves about themselves to feel better. The second of those possibilities would require that someone, in the seconds before that curse was cast, did a thing that magic does not very often allow itself to do, which is to be wholly and entirely about love. I cannot tell from blood alone which of those two it is. It may be both. He looked then at the child in Esme's arms. The child had opened his eyes during the story. He was looking at Carlyle the way he had looked at Esme in the clearing, not at the face but at the whole of him, the way a person looks at a person they had been waiting for. His mouth was closed. His small hand was open at his chest. His name, said Carlyle, is Harry. There is a famous photograph of his parents that has been in the wizard newspapers of 3 countries for the last week. I recognized them from the photograph the moment I saw the child. The mother had red hair and the father had hair like nothing on earth, and the 2 of them have just been killed in a war that the wizarding world has been fighting for 11 years, against a man who calls himself by a French word that means flight from death. The boy was at home with his parents when it happened. The boy was the only survivor. Voldemort, said Edward very quietly. Carlyle looked at him. I read it in the kitchen, Edward said. I read it in your head 2 nights ago when you came in from the hospital. You had picked up the newspaper at the airport in Seattle, and you had not yet read it, but the headline was there, and the name was there. I asked you what was wrong, and you said the world had got a great deal worse, and I asked which world, and you did not answer me, and I let it go. Yes, Carlyle said. That. He turned back to the family. The Wizard War, he said, is over as of the night of the 31st of October, the night before this one. The man who began it is dead, or in any case the man who began it is no longer effective, because the boy in Esme's arms is the reason the curse failed. The wizard government in Britain has been celebrating for 36 hours. They have also lost track of the boy. The boy was last seen with a friend of the family, a man named Hagrid, who handed him to another man who was going to take him to the boy's only living relatives, who are humans of the most ordinary kind in Surrey. He did not arrive in Surrey. He was diverted somewhere between the village in Scotland and the suburb in England by a person or persons unknown, and he has, until tonight, been considered lost. He is not lost. He is here. He is in this house. He is in your arms, Esme. Esme looked down at the boy. The boy looked up at her. Harry, she said. He blinked. Harry, she said again. The corner of his mouth moved upward 1/4 of an inch. I am going to call the brother of the headmaster in the morning, Carlyle said. I am going to tell him what I know. I am going to ask him to come here. I am going to ask him when he comes to formalize what we are about to do tonight. He looked at his family. Now we vote. There was a silence at the table. Esme did not vote. She held the child. She was the proposal. She had been the proposal since the moment she had lifted him out of the basket, and the family knew it, and she knew it. And a vote in which she was the proposal could not also be a vote in which she had a ballot. She sat with the child against her chest, and she looked at each face around the table, and she let them say, "Rosalie," said Carlyle. Rosalie did not speak. She had a thing on her face that her family had not seen on her face for 47 years. It was the thing that had been on her face the night she had brought Emmett up the slope in Tennessee, and it was the thing that had been on her face the night she had decided, in 1933, that she was going to be a person again, and not a thing. It was the face of Rosalie Hale at the moment of saying yes to a thing she had not let herself want. Rosalie put her hands flat on the table. The hands trembled very slightly, which the hands of Rosalie Hale did not do. She closed her eyes. "I have wanted," she said. Her voice was the voice she used in the garage, the voice of arithmetic and wrenches. She used it now because it was the voice she trusted. She would not have been able to use any other voice and not break. "I have wanted," she said again, "for 60 years to hold a child. I have wanted to hold a child in this house since the day Esme moved into this house. I have wanted it the way some people want air. I have not asked for it because I did not want to make Esme sad, and I did not want to make Emmett sad, and I did not want to make myself sad in a way that was the same sad over and over again. I have done other things. I have rebuilt the engine of the truck 3 times. I have replanted the kitchen garden twice. I have read every novel published in the English language since 1820. I have done these things instead of the thing that I have wanted. And tonight, Esme, you walked into the kitchen with a child in your arms, and I felt, for the first time in 60 years, the thing I have been holding underneath." She opened her eyes. They were wet. They could not weep, but they could be wet, and Rosalie Hale's eyes were wet at the dining table at 4 in the morning, and not one of them looked away. "I vote yes," said Rosalie. Emmett, beside her, put his arm around her shoulders. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Rosalie's vote had been his vote since Rosalie had taken her seat. "Emmett," said Carlyle. "Yes," said Emmett. "Alice." "Yes," said Alice. "Of course, I saw him at 311. I saw the man who is coming. I saw the year and the year after and the year after that. I saw him on a broom. I saw him on a stage. I saw him at a graduation. I saw him at a wedding, although the wedding was very far away and the bride had hair like fire. I saw him asleep in this house 10,000 times. I vote yes." Jasper. Jasper looked at Esme. He had been doing the thing with the air all night, and Esme could feel that he had stopped doing it now, because the air no longer required it. The room had become, by itself, a room that did not need its edges softened. "Yes," said Jasper. "I have not in this house in 4 years ever felt a thing as cleanly as I felt what came off Esme when she walked through that door. I would not vote against that if you held a stake to my heart. Yes." "Edward." Edward did not answer immediately. He was looking at the child. The child was looking back. "There is a complication," he said. The table got still. "Tell us," said Carlyle. "The boy has people," Edward said. "The boy has, in Britain, a wizard government that believes him to be a national hero, and a school that has been waiting to enroll him since the night he was born, and a great many wizards who would like very much to meet him. He has also a man with shaking hands, who took him from a man named Hagrid and brought him 3,000 miles west and put him in a clearing in our woods. I do not know which of these people we should worry about and which we should not. I do not know which of them know he is here and which do not. I do not know whether the wizards will permit a vampire family to keep a wizard child. I do not know whether they will come for him in a day, in a year, in 10 years. I do not know whether they will be kind when they come." He paused. "None of this changes my vote," Edward said. "I vote yes. I vote yes because if we do not keep him, our mother will not keep on. I vote yes because I have heard the boy dream of the moss-colored sweater, and I have heard him think it is the safest thing in the world. I vote yes because Carlyle has already begun making the phone call he is going to make in the morning, and Carlyle does not begin a phone call unless he is going to finish it. I vote yes. I am telling you the complication because we will need to plan for the complication, not because the complication changes the vote. Yes, said Carlyle, very softly. He sat back from the table. He folded his hands. It is decided, he said. He looked at Esme. Mother, he said. She had not been called mother by Carlyle in 71 years. He had called her wife, and he had called her love, and he had called her Esme, and he had called her, on 3 occasions in the first decade of their unlife together, the name she had used as a human, which was the name she had told him on the second night of her vampire life, and had asked him never to use again. He had never called her mother. He had used the word now because the word now meant a thing it had not meant before. She looked at him. Yes, she said. Welcome him. She looked down at the child. He was awake. He was looking at the lamp above the table, and the lamp was making a soft yellow circle on the cherry wood, and his green eyes were full of the yellow of the lamp. He was breathing. His hand was open at his chest. He smelled of milk and salt and the wet damp blanket and the wrongness that was not wrongness, the wrongness that was him. The lightning lay clean and pink against the soft hair of his forehead. Hello, Harry, she said. He turned his head a degree toward her voice. You are home, she said. He breathed in, he breathed out. His hand at his chest opened the rest of the way and reached, blind, the way it had reached in the clearing, and it found the collar of her sweater, and it closed. She put her cheek against the crown of his head. It was the gentlest thing she had done in 103 years. The morning came at 6:27. Esme had carried the child to the rocking chair in the living room. The rocking chair was a chair Esme had built with her own hands the summer of 1979. For no reason she had been able to articulate at the time. Out of curly maple from a fallen tree 2 miles upriver. She had carved the headrest in the shape of a leaf, and she had stained the wood the color of dark honey, and she had finished the rockers with such care that they made no sound when they moved. The chair had stood in the corner of the living room for 3.5 years, and she had sat in it perhaps a dozen times, and she had told herself it was a chair for guests, although they had no guests. The chair was for this morning. The chair had been for this morning all along. She had not been able to articulate the reason 3.5 years ago because the reason was 3.5 years ahead of her. She rocked. The child slept. The family moved very quietly around the house. Emmett had gone outside to chop firewood the family did not need, because Emmett had to do a thing with his hands when a thing had happened he could not punch. Jasper sat on the bottom of the stairs and read a book at the speed of a vampire who had read it twice already. Alice was in the garage because Alice was making, with 2 yards of linen and a tin of paint, and a thing she had improvised out of 2 coat hangers, a mobile that had not previously existed in the world. Rosalie was in the kitchen. Rosalie had begun cooking. Rosalie did not cook, ordinarily, and the family did not eat, but Rosalie had a vague memory from her human childhood that a mother in a house with a baby was supposed to have soup on the stove, and so Rosalie was making soup. The soup was chicken and rice and carrots and onion and a small handful of thyme. Carlyle had told her when she had asked that an infant of 15 months could eat strained vegetables, and that there were brands of strained vegetables one could buy in jars at any grocery store in America, and Rosalie had heard this and had nodded and had then begun making soup anyway, because Rosalie's grief about her own lost human motherhood was a soup-making grief, and not a jar-buying one. Edward had not left the room with Esme. He sat on the floor at her feet with his back against the wall and his hands open at his knees. He was listening to the child dream. He had been listening to the child dream for 1 hour and 41 minutes. He had not yet said what the child was dreaming. Carlyle came into the living room at 6:27. He had been on the telephone in his study. He sat down on the ottoman opposite Esme's chair. He did not speak immediately. "He is coming," he said at last. "When?" He took the international flu in Hogsmeade 15 minutes ago. He should be in our living room within the hour. He is bringing paper and a quill. Aberforth, Esme said. Yes. You told him. I told him a vampire family in the state of Washington had taken in his nephew's missing godson, and that I wished him to come and formalize an adoption that would not be known to the wizard government for as long as we and he could keep it from being known. How did he respond? He said, Carlyle said, that he had thought he would have to wait 6 months before he could go and find the child himself, and that he was glad to be saved the trouble. Esme thought about that for a moment. He does not love his brother. He does not love his brother's politics. There is a difference. I have known Aberforth for 123 years. He has not been wrong about a single thing he has chosen to take a position on. He has chosen to take a position on very few things, which is one of the reasons he has not been wrong. What will he do when he comes? He will write the boy's name on a piece of paper that has a charm woven into it, and he will write your name on the paper, and my name, and the seal will close, and the boy will be ours by wizard law, which is the only law that matters in this case. He will tell us how to enroll him at the school in Scotland when the time comes. He will tell us how to keep the wizard government from finding him until then. He will also, I think, want to hold the boy himself for a few minutes. Yes, Esme said. Esme. Yes. Aberforth knew the boy's mother. He was fond of her. He will be, yes. All right. Carlyle leaned forward. He put his hand on the curve of the child's foot where the foot stuck out of the blanket. The hand was the hand of the doctor who had set 1,000 bones, and it lay on the foot as gently as a leaf falling. We will need to give him our name, he said. On the paper. Yes. Harry Cullen. Harry James Cullen, Esme said. The middle name was his father's first name. How do you know that? Edward told me. The dream had the woman with the red hair saying both names. Harry James, Harry James. Carlyle looked at his oldest son on the floor. He has been listening, Carlyle said. He has been listening for 1 hour and 41 minutes, said Esme. Edward. Yes. What does the child dream now? Edward smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been listening to a thing he had not expected to hear and had received in the listening a thing he had not expected to receive. He dreams a wooden ceiling, Edward said. He dreams a yellow lamp. He dreams a leaf carved in the wood at the back of his head. He dreams a woman rocking a chair that does not creak. He dreams the wool of a sweater. He dreams a heartbeat that is not a heartbeat and is somehow more steady for not being one. Edward. Yes. He dreams what he sees. He dreams what he sees, and he dreams that what he sees is good. The screen door creaked at the top hinge. A footstep came down the porch. A man stood suddenly in the doorway of the living room. He had not knocked. He had not, as far as any of them had heard, come up the drive in a car. He had appeared on the porch, fully formed, between 1 second and the next, the way a candle appears in a dark room when someone has struck a match. He was a tall, thin man with white hair and a white beard and gold spectacles, and a long coat the color of weathered tin. His eyes were blue and tired and very kind, and they were the eyes of a man who had been awake for a great many hours and who was prepared to be awake for a great many more. He looked at Carlyle. He nodded once. He looked at Esme. He looked at the child in her arms. His mouth did a thing that was not a smile and was not a smile. "Hello, lad," said Aberforth Dumbledore very quietly to the boy in Esme's lap. "You've turned up in a much better place than I'd hoped." He came into the living room. He set his hat on the table. He sat down. "Now then," he said, "let's see about a piece of paper." Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The First Year as Mother. The paper Aberforth Dumbledore had brought with him was the color of cream and the weight of cloth, and there were 3 lines on it where there were supposed to be names, and he wrote them in with a black quill that he had carried in an inner pocket of his coat. He wrote Harry James Potter on the first line. He crossed Potter through with a single neat line and wrote Cullen above it, because there was a kind of pen for that and he had brought one. He wrote Esme Ann Cullen on the second line and Carlisle Arrow Cullen on the third. He spoke a word in a language none of the family recognized. The paper rippled, very slightly, the way water ripples when a stone is held an inch above it without touching, and the rippling went still, and the names were on the paper, and the paper closed itself around them, and the room smelled, for a half-second, of warm wax and old apples and a green thing growing in spring rain. When the smell faded, the boy in Esme's arms was, in the eyes of the only law that mattered for him, her son. Aberforth put the paper into the inner pocket of his coat. He held out his arms. "May I, Mrs.?" She gave him the boy. She did it without thought, and she did it without grief, and she did it because the man asking had said the word Mrs. the way men of his generation said it, as a word of respect for a thing they had finally seen. She placed the child in the long, thin arms of Aberforth Dumbledore, and Aberforth held him with the practiced one-handed swing of a man who had held a great many children in a great many decades, and the child did not cry. The child looked up at the white beard. The child reached, with the same small blind reaching he had reached for the wool of her sweater with, and he caught a piece of the beard in his fist. Aberforth laughed. It was a sound the family had not expected. It was the sound of a closed door opening, suddenly, on a room where someone had been sitting alone for a long time. "You would," he said to the child. "Your father did the same at your age. Your mother did the same at your age. I have known both of them. I have known your grandmother on your father's side, and I knew, when I was a boy, your grandfather's grandfather, who was an orer in the bad, bad days before there was a ministry to be an orer for. You come from a line of beard-grabbers, and your mother loved your father, and your father loved your mother, and they would be glad, lad, to know where you were tonight." He looked up at Esme. His blue eyes were very tired and very kind and very clear. "You'll do," he said. "Thank you," said Esme. "He will not be safe in Britain for some years. He will not be in Britain. He will be safer here than there. There are men in my country who have been my brother's friends for 40 years who will, when the boy is 11, send him a letter. They will expect the boy to come. The boy will need to come. He will need to be a wizard, and he will need to be educated as one, and the school in Scotland is the place where that happens. And we will not, no matter how much we would all of us like to, change that. But that is 10 years off, Mrs., and 10 years in this house, with you, will do for him a thing that no other 10 years in any other house in my country or yours could have done." "What thing?" "You will teach him," said Aberforth, "what it means to be loved by a thing that does not need him. The wizards who will come to know him when he comes to my country will love him because of what he has done, and they will not be wrong to. But what he has done is a thing of his first year of life, Mrs., and a man who is loved only for what he did in his first year of life grows up a small, bitter, frightened thing. You will not love him for what he did. You will love him because he is. I have looked at you for 2 minutes. I am not wrong about this." She did not say anything for a moment. "How will I keep him safe?" she said. Aberforth handed the boy back to her. "I will see to that piece," he said. "There will be charms on this house when I leave. There will be a wand for you to carry that you will not be able to use, but that will alert me if it is broken. There will be an owl every 6 months asking after the lad. There will be, when he is 6 and again when he is 9, a visit from me to see what he is becoming. There will be a letter when he is 11 that I will see to it reaches this house and not the other house. There will be, Mrs., a great deal of paperwork done in Edinburgh and London by friends of mine who will be paid in fire whiskey and silence, and the boy will be off the books of the British wizard government for 10 years, and at the end of 10 years he will arrive at the school with the cleanest hands of any new student that school has ever admitted. That is what I will do. That is what I am for." "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me, Mrs. I am paying a debt to his mother. She was a friend of mine when she was small." Now he stood up. He put his hat back on. I am for the flu. You will not see me for 6 months. Good night, lad." He looked at the child once more. He nodded at Esme. He nodded at Carlyle. He walked out onto the porch into the dark, and the family heard in the next second the small, clean pop of a man transporting himself across an ocean. And then the porch was empty, and the wind was in the cedars, and the boy in her arms was still holding a single white hair from Aberforth Dumbledore's beard in his small fist. The hair stayed in the fist for an hour. Esme did not pry it out. She rocked. The first week was a learning. She learned the smell of him when he was hungry, which was milk sour, and the smell of him when he was tired, which was bread warm, and the smell of him when he needed to be changed, which was the smell of any infant who needed to be changed, and the smell of him when he was content, which was a smell she had no word for and would never need one for, because she would know it for the rest of her unlife and never have to name it. She learned the bottle. Rosalie had bought 4 bottles, and the 4 bottles were on the kitchen counter in a clean line, and Esme learned which of them the boy preferred. The second one, the one with the green silicone nipple, which fit his mouth in a way the others did not, and she learned the exact temperature of the formula he would accept, which she found by holding the bottle against the inside of her own wrist, the way she had been told to in 1879, and learning, by the second night, that the temperature he wanted was the temperature at which her wrist could no longer feel a difference between the bottle and itself. She mixed the formula at 5-minute intervals through the night, because she did not sleep, and because she did not sleep she could fill the gap between his feedings with thinking about the next one, and the next one always came on schedule and he ate. She learned to change him. This was a thing Rosalie had been ready to take from her, but Rosalie had understood, after the second night, that the changing was a thing Esme would not give up. There was a small low table in the room they had cleared on the ground floor for him, and a stack of soft cotton things on the table, and a stack of paper things, and a stack of small towels, and a small jar of ointment that Carlyle had recommended. She did the changing in the way the nurse with the red hair had shown her in 1879, which was the same way they did it in 1982, because the basic problem of an infant's body has not changed in 10,000 years. She kept one hand on his belly the whole time, because he liked it, because she could feel his pulse through her palm, because the pulse was the proof that he was alive, and the proof of his being alive was a thing she had not yet stopped requiring. She learned the words he liked. He liked the word lamp, said softly. He liked the word fern. He liked the word river. He did not like the word no, although Esme almost never had occasion to use it. He liked the names of his sisters and brothers spoken in order, in a row, the way you say the names of saints in a litany. Carlyle, Edward, Rosalie, Emmett, Alice, Jasper, and then at the end, Mama. She said the litany 10 times the first week, 20 times the second, 50 times the third. She did not get tired of it. She would not get tired of it ever in any of the years that would come. She had 97 years of unspent speech, and she would, beginning now, spend it on the names of her family. The family arranged itself around the small ground floor room. Rosalie spent the first 3 nights on a chair in the doorway. She did not sleep. None of them did. She watched Esme rock, and she watched the child eat, and she watched the child sleep, and on the 4th night she said very quietly from the doorway, "Esme, yes. May I hold him?" Yes. She held him for 2 hours. She did not move. She held him with both hands flat against his back and her chin tucked above his head, and she stared at the wall with the look of a woman holding a thing she had wanted for 60 years, and had not allowed herself, even in the holding, to admit she had wanted. And when she handed him back to Esme, her hands were trembling, very slightly, the way the hands of a woman who has been holding her breath tremble at the moment of letting it out. "Thank you," said Rosalie. "You will hold him every day," said Esme. "Every day for the rest of his life he will need you." "Yes," said Rosalie. "All right." Carlyle took the medical part. He weighed the boy each Sunday on a small scale he brought home from the hospital and that he had inspected 3 times before he trusted it. He measured his head. He measured his length. He listened to his heart with a stethoscope that he warmed against his own palm first, because Carlyle had learned in the 17th century that a cold stethoscope on a child's chest taught the child that doctors were cold, and Carlyle had spent 2 centuries unteaching the children of 3 continents this lesson. He wrote the numbers down in a small leather book, and he taped into the book, beside each number, a single white feather. He did not say why. Esme did not ask. She had a guess. It was a thing about Carlyle's own lost human son, who was a story she had not been told and would never ask to be told, because Carlyle had not yet found the words for it in 346 years, and his words would come when they came. Edward took the music. He moved his piano. He moved it from the long parlor at the far end of the house, where it had stood since 1979, into the small room with the rocking chair and the changing table and the crib. He moved it alone. He moved it at night, while the boy slept, and he replaced the half wall of the small room with a wider doorway in order to fit it. The piano was a black Steinway upright. It stood now against the wall opposite the crib, and Edward sat down at it for the first time on the 5th night of the boy's life in the house, and he began to play. He played for 2 hours. The boy slept the whole way through. In the morning Carlyle came in and stood in the doorway and listened, and after a long time he said, "What was that, son?" "I am writing," said Edward. "I am writing a thing I have not had occasion to write before." He played it again the next night, and the next, and by the end of the first week the family understood, without any of them having said it, that Edward had begun to compose a lullaby that was not finished and would not be finished for a long time, and that the boy in the crib was the thing it was being written toward. Esme would sit in the rocking chair while he played. She would close her eyes. She would not sleep, because she could not, but she would do the thing that vampires do that is the closest a vampire can come to sleeping, which is to be wholly inside a sound, the way a swimmer is inside the water, the way a leaf is inside the wind. She was inside Edward's music for 2 hours every night for the rest of the first year. Alice took the clothes. It was not a frivolous thing. It was, in its way, the most serious thing any of them did. Alice had seen in the first vision that had come when Rosalie had opened the door the entire wardrobe of Harry Cullen, age 1 through age 11, in detail, in colors, in fabrics, in the exact tiny stitches on the inside of each cuff. She had begun on the 2nd day. She had ordered the wool from Scotland. She had ordered the cotton from Egypt. She had ordered the silk because there would be silk, eventually, when he was older, on collars from Suzhou. She made him in the first week 4 sleepers, 2 coats, 6 pairs of soft trousers, 8 shirts, and a single small soft hat in the color of green that matched his eyes. She had sewn the hat by hand. The seams of it were inside the hat, because Alice had decided that no seam of any garment of her brother's would ever touch his skin, and she had made this decision with the same calm finality with which she had decided in 1950 to be a Cullen. She presented the hat to Esme on the 7th day. Esme put it on the boy's head, and the boy reached up and pulled it off and put it in his mouth, and Alice clapped her hands once, delighted, because she had foreseen this and had made the hat of a wool that was safe to put in one's mouth. Jasper took the air. He did the thing he had begun doing on the first night, but he did it now as a daily practice. He would come into the small room twice a day, in the morning and at dusk, and he would sit on the floor against the wall opposite the crib, and he would breathe out into the room in his particular way, and the room would become a room without sharp edges. The boy slept better when Jasper had been in the room. The boy laughed sooner when Jasper had been in the room. The boy did not, of course, know what Jasper was doing. Jasper would not have let him know. Jasper had a horror of being noticed for the thing he did, the way Edward had a horror of being undignified, and the 2 horrors were, in Jasper, related horrors, and Esme had loved him for both of them ever since the night he had come walking up the drive in Wisconsin in 1950 with Alice on his arm. Emmett took the rest. Emmett did, in the first year of Harry Cullen's life, every physical thing the family did not know how to do. He built a fence around the kitchen garden so that the boy could not, when he began to crawl into the river. He built a small wooden gate at the top of the stairs. He built a low railing along the porch. He built a swing in the second week, out of a plank of cedar and 2 lengths of rope, and he hung it from the lowest branch of the alder at the edge of the lawn, and he sat in it once himself to test it, and it held, and he did not break it, although he was Emmett, and a thing breaking when Emmett sat in it would have been within the standard distribution of Emmett's life. He carried the boy on his shoulders when the boy was old enough, with a hand around each small ankle, and he would walk in a slow circle around the kitchen with the boy laughing on top of him. And Esme, watching from the chair, would feel the laugh of her son in the air of her kitchen, and would understand that what Emmett had been built for all along was this. The first cry came on the 11th night. It was not a cry of hunger. It was not a cry of needing to be changed. It was a cry that came up out of the boy in the middle of the night, when no one had touched him, when nothing in the room had moved, when the lamp on the dresser was the same low yellow it had been for hours. He cried. He cried the way a year-old child cries, which is the cry of a small body that does not yet have a way of saying what is wrong. And the cry filled the small room and went out into the hall and went up the stairs. And within 90 seconds every member of the family was at the door of the small room, and Esme was already at the crib with him in her arms. She rocked. He did not stop. She walked. She walked with him, the way the nurse with the red hair had told her to in 1879. She walked the long oval around the kitchen and into the parlor and back. She walked it 3 times, 4 times, 11 times. He cried. She walked. She did not panic. Panic would have been a betrayal of him, and she would not ever betray him. After 28 minutes she sat down in the rocking chair. She began to sing. She sang the song her mother had sung to her in Ohio in the 1850s, in the small wooden house with the blue curtains. She had not sung it in 103 years. She had thought she had forgotten the words. She had not forgotten the words. She sang them in the small, accurate voice she had had as a girl, which she had not used since she had been a girl, which the family had never heard. She sang the song twice through. She sang it a 3rd time. He stopped crying. He had not stopped because he was tired. He had stopped because the song was a thing he had heard, somewhere, somehow before, perhaps in another mother's voice, perhaps in the voice of the red-haired woman who had said his name. The song had a tune that was older than any country in which it had been sung, and Esme was holding him, and Esme was singing it now, and the song was, by virtue of being a song any mother might sing, a song his. He went asleep against her shoulder. She did not move for 2 hours. The family did not move either. They stood in the doorway, the 6 of them, and they listened, and Edward, on the floor at the foot of the rocking chair, had his eyes closed. And Esme understood at some point in the 2nd hour that her son was hearing the song in her head while she sang it aloud, and was therefore hearing the song twice at once, and was therefore inside the song in a way that no human, ever, in any night of any year, had been inside any song. He had been inside it, and he had not interrupted it. He had let his mother sing. The first laugh came on the 23rd day. It came at a thing Emmett did. Emmett had a habit of pretending to drop the boy when he carried him from one room to another, and the pretending consisted of letting the boy fall an inch and then catching him. And the boy had, for 22 days, regarded this practice with the calm, wide-eyed attention of a small scholar studying a phenomenon. On the 23rd day, in the kitchen, between the refrigerator and the table, Emmett let the boy fall an inch, and the boy laughed. The laugh was a small, bright thing. It was the size of the kitchen and not larger than the kitchen, and it did not need to be larger than the kitchen, because the kitchen was, at that moment, the size of the world. Emmett stopped where he stood. Esme, who had been at the counter mixing a bottle, stopped also. She turned. She held the bottle in her hand. She looked at her son in her oldest son's arms. The boy was looking up at Emmett's face with the wide green eyes and the small open mouth and the line of small new teeth, and he was laughing. And he did it again. And he did it a third time. And Emmett, the oldest and largest and loudest of her children, sat down on the kitchen floor with the boy in his arms because his knees, which had been the knees of a vampire for 47 years, had decided in that instant that they could not hold him up any longer. "Did you hear that?" Emmett said. His voice was small. "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" "I heard it," said Esme. "Did you hear that, Rose?" Rosalie was in the doorway. She had heard it. "He laughed," said Emmett. "Esme, he laughed." "I heard." "Esme, yes, he likes me." She crossed the kitchen. She crouched down in front of her son and her son. She put a hand on Emmett's shoulder. She put the other on the round, warm cheek of the boy. She did not say anything because there was nothing she needed to say. The boy laughed again. The first word came in the 4th month. He had been making sounds for some weeks. He had a babble that was very particular. A long string of vowels strung together with consonants the family had not heard infants use before. And Carlyle had said, calmly, that wizard children sometimes acquired sounds out of order, and that there was a body of literature about it, and that they should not worry if the boy was using consonants no English child used, because the consonants were probably not English. He had been making, in particular, a sound that was something like ma and was not quite ma. Esme had been waiting. On a morning in February, with the rain on the porch roof and the kitchen warm with the soup Rosalie had not stopped making, he reached for her face from his high chair and he said, "Ma." He said it once. He waited. He said it again. She did not weep. She had not in 103 years learned how. The thing that happened in her chest when he said the word for the second time was the thing that had happened in her chest in the clearing, and the kitchen, and the rocking chair, and 100 small moments since, and she let it pass through her without naming it. She picked him up out of the high chair. She held him against her shoulder. "Yes," she said. "Yes, my love, Ma." He said it a third time into the side of her neck, into the cold marble of her skin, into the wool of the sweater she had been wearing every day since the night of the clearing, because she could not bear to wear another. He said, "Ma," she said, "yes." The first step came in the 7th month. It came at the small, low table in the kitchen where he had been pulling himself up for some weeks. He stood for a moment, holding on with both hands. He let go. He stood without holding. He looked at Esme across the kitchen. He took a step. He took a second. He took a third, and on the third he sat down, and he did not cry because the sitting down had been part of the plan, and he had walked 3 steps, and he was proud, and he looked at her across the kitchen, and he laughed. She crossed the kitchen. She crouched down. She picked him up. "3," she said. "3 steps, my love, 3. Ma," he said, "3. Ma, my beautiful boy." The first year ended on the night before his 2nd birthday. She stood with him at the window in the small ground-floor room. The window faced the river, and beyond the river the forest, and beyond the forest the ridge under which the clearing lay. The clearing had been there. She had walked it in the year exactly once, alone in the 3rd month, and she had stood at its edge and looked at the moss and the salmonberry ring and the old stump, and she had thanked it, very softly, in the way you thank a place that has given you a thing, and she had walked back home. He stood at the window in her arms. He had grown. He was no longer the small, thin thing she had lifted from a basket. He was a round, sturdy, dark-haired boy with green eyes and a scar shaped like lightning and a laugh that filled the kitchen and a small, clear vocabulary of about 30 words. And he was wearing the green hat Alice had made him in the first week, because the hat still fit, because Alice had foreseen exactly when he would outgrow it and had made it the right size. "Ridge," he said. "Ridge," she agreed. "Ma, yes." "Mine," He had not before used that word. He had used the word my attached to small things, my hat, my bottle, my Carlisle, my Rosalie. He had not until now used the word mine. She turned her head. She looked at him. Mine. He nodded the small grave nod of a small grave child. Mine, he said. He took with his small hand a piece of the moss-colored sweater. Mine. She put her cheek against the crown of his head. Yes, she said, I am yours. The wind moved in the cedars beyond the river. The forest leaned and dripped and breathed. She rocked. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Years in Forks, a mother who stays year 2. Carlisle, the second year was the year of the medical book. Carlisle had begun, in the second week of the second year, the project of writing for Harry a book that did not yet exist anywhere in any language. It was a book about the body. It was a book about the wizard body in particular, although it was a book about the human body first, because Carlisle had decided that a child ought to understand the ordinary architecture before he was told the ways in which his own architecture differed. He wrote it by hand, on cream-colored paper, with a fountain pen that had been his father's, and he wrote in the small, clean script of a man who had been writing case notes for 200 years, and he illustrated it himself in watercolor in the evenings at the kitchen table, with the boy on a chair beside him watching. The boy was 2. The boy could not yet read. The boy could, however, look at a watercolor of the human heart and put a small finger on the chambered round of it and say, mine. Yes, Carlisle would say, mine and yours and Esme's, although Esme's is not beating. Why? Because Esme is a different kind of person than you are. Oh, that was the second year. The boy asked and Carlisle answered, and Carlisle did not lie. There was a family meeting in the first week about whether the boy should be told the truth about the nature of the family he had joined. And the meeting had lasted 10 minutes, because Carlisle had said, very quietly, that a child who is lied to about a thing as obvious as whether the people he loves are alive will spend the rest of his life unable to trust what he is told. And the family had agreed, and the lying had been ruled out before lunch. So the boy knew. He knew at 2 that his Carlisle and his Edward and his Rosalie and his Emmett and his Alice and his Jasper and his mamma did not eat the food in the kitchen. He knew that they sometimes went away for an evening and came back with eyes that were a brighter gold than they had been when they left. He knew that they did not sleep, although they sat in chairs with their eyes closed when he was sleeping, because he liked it that way, because a child who wakes in the night likes to see a person in a chair with closed eyes nearby. He knew that they were cold. He had decided in the second month of the second year that cold was the temperature of being held, and that warm was the temperature of being held by another child at the daycare, and that he preferred cold because cold was his. Carlisle began to teach him the names of the bones. He did it the way he did everything, which was without hurry. He named one bone a week. He drew the bone on the paper. He let the boy color it in with the watercolors. He pointed to the bone on the boy's own body, very gently, with one cool finger, and said the name of the bone, and the boy repeated the name. And at the end of the year the boy could name, on his own body and on Carlisle's, 52 bones. Esme would sit at the other end of the kitchen table during these lessons. She would do, ordinarily, a thing with her hands. She was teaching herself, in those months, the embroidery of a particular school of Japanese textile work that had a name she did not say aloud because her pronunciation embarrassed her. She would embroider a small bird on a small square of dark blue silk while Carlisle named the femur, and she would embroider the wing of the bird while Carlisle named the patella. And at the end of an hour she would put down the needle and Carlisle would put down the pen, and the three of them would walk, the boy between them, down to the river, and the boy would put a single round stone in his pocket to take home, because the boy in the second year had begun the practice of taking a stone home from the river every day. And the stones now lived in a glass jar on the windowsill in his room, and the jar was up to the third quarter and rising. And Esme, every Sunday, dusted the jar with the small dry brush she used for the embroidery thread, because the dust on a jar of stones is the dust of a year of small clear days, and she would not let it lie. Year 3, Edward the third year, was the year of the piano. He had begun to play. He could not, of course, reach the pedals. He could not, in the second month of the third year, span an octave with the small hand of a 2¾ year old. Edward did not care. Edward sat behind him on the bench, with his long arms reaching past the boy's shoulders, and Edward did the pedals, and Edward did the octaves, and the boy did the middle of the keyboard, which was the part the boy could reach, and the two of them played together every evening for an hour. The boy learned the names of the notes before he learned the names of the months. He learned the difference between major and minor before he learned the difference between yesterday and tomorrow. He had a favorite piece. The piece was the lullaby Edward had begun in the first week of his life and had still not finished. The piece had, in the third year, grown a second movement. The boy could play the opening phrase with one hand. Edward played the rest. The boy would close his eyes sometimes when Edward was playing, and his small dark eyebrows would draw together in the look of a small person hearing a thing he had not heard before and did not yet have the words for. "What does it sound like to you?" Edward asked him once. The boy thought about it. "It sounds like Ma," he said. Edward did not play for 2 minutes. Then he picked up where he had left off and he played the rest of the second movement, and he did not that night tell Esme what the boy had said. He told her the next morning very quietly in the kitchen with his back against the counter and his hands on the rim of it. "He said it sounds like you," Edward said. "What does?" "The piece." She looked at her son for a long time. "I am sorry," she said. "For what?" "That you have written a thing as beautiful as that, and it sounds in your brother's ear like me." Edward smiled briefly, the smile he used very rarely, the one that lifted only the left corner of his mouth. "Mother," he said, "I have been writing it about you. It has always sounded like you. He is the first person to hear it, that is all." She put her hand on the back of his hand on the counter. She left it there for 2 seconds. She took it away. She went to the cupboard for a clean bottle for the boy's milk, because the boy at 2¾ still drank a bottle in the morning, because Esme had not asked him to stop, because the bottle was a thing he liked, because there was no reason to take it from him. Edward played that evening. Esme rocked. The boy fell asleep at the keyboard with his head on the wood above middle C, and Edward did not move him. Edward played very softly around the small dark head for another hour, and when he finally stopped, Esme came across the room and lifted the boy and carried him to his bed and put him under the blanket and tucked the corner under his shoulder so the air would not touch his skin. And she did not let go of the blanket until his small fist had closed on it, the way his small fist had closed on the moss-colored sweater in the clearing, the way it had closed on the white hair from Aberforth's beard, the way it would close in the years to come on a great many small good things that were his. Year 4, Rosalie, the fourth year, was the year of the wolf. He had been told about the wolves. The family had told him together, on the porch, on his 4th birthday, because the boy had begun to ask about the boundary line on the ridge that Esme would not let him go past. The family had told him that there were people on the other side of the line, that the people were not bad and not good but simply other, that the people had an agreement with the Cullens that meant the Cullens did not go north and the people did not come south, and that the boy must not ever walk past the boundary alone. The boy had nodded and had said yes, and had then asked, in the small clear voice he was learning to use for serious questions, "Why?" "Because there are some among them," Carlyle said, "who would not understand that you are ours." "Why?" "Because you are a wizard child and they have not perhaps met one before and they would not know what to make of you. And because the rest of you smells of us, even though your blood does not, and the smell of us is a smell they have been taught for many generations to dislike. Why? Carlyle began to answer. Rosalie, beside him, put her hand on the boy's shoulder. Because the world has been afraid of us, Harry, for a very long time, she said. And the wolves are afraid of us because they have been told to be. It is not their fault. It is not yours. But it is the way of the world, and we will not go past the line until they have decided that you are safe. Do you understand? He looked at her with the green eyes that took everything seriously. Yes, Rose. Good boy. That was how the 4th year began, and that was how it should have stayed. It did not. In the 7th month of the 4th year, the boy, 4.5, climbed onto the back of his bicycle. A small green bicycle with training wheels that Emmett had assembled in the garage on the morning of his 4th birthday. And he rode it down the long drive to the river road. And he turned right instead of left. And he rode it north for 1.5 miles before he understood that he had got himself farther from home than he had ever been before. And he tried to turn around. And the front wheel hit a root. And he came off the bicycle into the ditch beside the river road, and he scraped his knee, and he sat in the ditch and cried. He did not, in the cry, cross the line. He cried in a ditch that was still technically on the south side of the agreement. But he was within 30 feet of the line, and the wind was coming out of the north, and a member of the tribe on the other side, who had been running the boundary on patrol, smelled him. The wolf was perhaps 15 feet long at the shoulder. It came out of the brush on the north side of the road at the speed of a thing that had been running and was no longer running, and it stopped on the south side of the road with its head lowered and its yellow eyes on the small boy in the ditch, and it sniffed. It sniffed twice. The boy looked up. He did not scream. He had been told about wolves on the ridge, and he had been told that one might appear, and he had been told by Rosalie that if one ever did appear he was to be quiet and small and not move, and he was 4.5 and he was obedient, and he was quiet and small and he did not move. He sat in the ditch with the blood on his knee and his green eyes on the wolf, and he waited. The wolf came 2 steps closer. Then it stopped. Then it sat down. It sat in the road on the south side of the line with its yellow eyes on the boy, and it did not approach further. And after a moment it lifted its great head and it called once, a long deep call that carried up the river road and down the river road and back into the woods on its own side of the line. The call was a thing the boy had not heard before. It was not a howl. It was a thing closer to a horn note. Rosalie heard the note from the porch of the house 1.5 miles away. She was on the porch in her gardening apron with a trowel in one hand, because Rosalie had decided in the spring of the 4th year that she would grow tomatoes, and she was doing it the way Rosalie did all things, which was completely. She heard the horn note from the wolf, and she did not look at the line on the map, and she did not, for half a second, count to 10 the way Esme had taught her to. She dropped the trowel. She ran. She crossed the 1.5 miles in 14 seconds. She arrived in the ditch beside the boy in the 15th second. She put herself between the boy and the wolf in the 16th. She looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at her. The wolf was a very old wolf, by the standards of its kind, and it had been on the boundary patrol for 61 years, and it had seen a great many vampires, but it had never seen one move at the speed Rosalie had moved, and it had never seen one stand between a small human boy and a wolf with the absolute particular stillness of a thing that would die before it would move. It tilted its head. It made the horn note again, more softly. Then it stood up. It backed slowly across the road. It turned. It went back into the brush on the north side of the line. It did not look back. Rosalie stood in the ditch for a full minute. Then she turned around. She crouched down. She looked at the boy. The boy looked at her. He was not crying anymore. "Rose," he said. "Yes. I scraped my knee. I see that. I'm sorry." She did not say it was all right. She did not say it was nothing. She did not say he had nothing to be sorry for. She picked him up. She held him against her shoulder. She walked the mile-and-a-half back to the house at the speed of an ordinary woman walking, because that was the speed she could trust her body at when she was carrying a child she had nearly lost. She set him down on the porch. She crouched in front of him. "Harry, yes, look at me." He looked. "I cannot tell you," she said, "how much I love you. There is not a word for it. There is not a number for it. The word and the number do not exist. I do not have them. The wolves do not have them. The wizards do not have them. The vampires do not have them. There is no word in any of the languages on this earth for the thing I felt when I heard the horn note. Do you understand me? Yes. There may not be a word, but there is a rule. The rule is that you do not ride your bicycle past the alder tree at the end of the drive without an adult. Ever. Do you understand? Yes. Now go inside. Esme is waiting." He went. Esme was at the kitchen door. Esme had heard the horn note also, and Esme had been across the kitchen and out the screen door before the horn note had finished. But Esme had stopped on the porch step because Esme had seen, in the half-second before she crossed the lawn, that Rosalie was already on the way. And Esme had understood that what Rosalie needed to do, Rosalie needed to do alone. Esme had stood on the porch step with her hand on the door jamb for 15 long seconds, and she had not moved, and she had heard the horn note die away, and she had heard, very faintly, the small voice of her son in a ditch a mile-and-a-half away saying, "I scraped my knee," and she had decided that she would trust her daughter, and she had stayed on the porch step. When Rosalie came up the lawn with the boy in her arms, Esme had stepped down off the porch and opened her arms, and she had received him from her daughter without speaking, and she had carried him into the kitchen and washed his knee and put a small, clean bandage on it, and the two of them had not spoken about it again that day. They had spoken about it the next morning at breakfast, when Rosalie had come down the stairs in her gardening apron and had stood at the kitchen counter and had said very softly to Esme, "I should have been there." "You were there," Esme said. "You were there in 14 seconds. No mother in the human world could have been there in 14 seconds. You were there exactly when he needed you. He could have died. He could have. He did not. He sat in a ditch and he did the thing you had taught him to do, and he was alive when you got there, and he was alive when I held him in the kitchen, and he is alive now. You taught him. That is what kept him alive, Rose. Not the running, the teaching." Rosalie put down her coffee cup, which was full and which she would not drink. She put her hands flat on the counter. She closed her eyes. "I love him," she said. "Esme, I love him so much. I know. I did not know I could. I know." Rosalie did not weep because Rosalie did not weep. The thing that happened in her chest was the thing Esme had felt a great many times in the years since the clearing. And the two of them stood at the counter for a long time without speaking, and the boy with the small, clean bandage on his knee woke up in his room down the hall, and they heard him call, very softly, the litany of the names. Carlisle, Edward, Rosalie, Emmett, Alice, Jasper. "Mama," Esme answered. "Yes, my love, I am here." Year 5, Emmett, the 5th year, was the year of the cliff. The cliff was on the south side of the property, where the long shoulder of the hill came down to the river, and the river had cut a stone face out of the hill that was about 20 feet high. Emmett had decided on the boy's 5th birthday that the boy was old enough to climb it. Esme had not been sure. Esme had said the word careful 16 times in the conversation. Emmett had said the word careful twice, because Emmett had a different definition of the word than Esme did, and Emmett's definition of careful included a great many things that Esme's did not. But Emmett had said also the thing that won the argument, "Esme, if I do not teach him to climb, he will climb anyway. I would rather he learn to fall from me than from the cliff." She had given in. The boy was 5 and 3 months. He stood at the bottom of the cliff with his small hands on the stone, and he looked up. Emmett stood at the top with his arms folded and his gold eyes on the boy. 3 rules, Emmett said. 3 points of contact at all times. If a hand is moving, the other 3 are not. Look at the rock above you, not the rock below. If you fall, you yell my name, I will catch you. Yes, Emmett. Climb. He climbed. He climbed slowly. He climbed with the small, careful patience of a small, careful child who was not afraid because the boy on the cliff above him was Emmett, and Emmett did not let small children fall. He climbed for 8 minutes. He climbed 12 feet. He reached on the 13th foot for a hold that was not there, and his right hand slipped, and he yelled in a small, clear voice that was the size of the cliff and not larger than it. Emmett! Emmett was beside him in the air before the cry had ended. He caught the boy. He carried him to the top of the cliff. He set him down on the grass at the edge. He looked at him. That is Rule 3, Emmett said. Now we go again. Yes, Emmett. He climbed again. He climbed to the top this time. He stood on the grass at the edge with his small chest moving fast and his green eyes wide and his small face flushed, and he did not say anything for a moment, and then he said, I climbed. You did. I climbed all of it. You did, Emmett. Yes. I want to do it again. Emmett laughed. The laugh moved out of him in the round, deep way it did, and it went down the river and into the woods and up the ridge. And Esme, who had been standing on the porch with her arms crossed for the entire 43 minutes the lesson had taken, heard the laugh and put her hand briefly to her chest, because the laugh was a thing she had been waiting to hear, and she had heard it. He climbed the cliff 3 times that day. He climbed it twice the next. He climbed it in the rest of the 5th year, 97 times, and Emmett was at the top of it every single time, and the boy did not, in any of the 97 climbs, fall again. He learned the rock. He learned which holds would hold and which would not. He learned the names Emmett had given to the holds, the bishop, the cradle, the little ear, and he learned, also, what the boy had not yet been able to articulate but was clearly learning by Christmas of the 5th year, which was that he could trust his own body, and he could trust his oldest brother, and there were things in the world he could do. Year 6, Alice, the 6th year, was the year of the wand. It was not properly a wand. It was a stick. Alice had cut it from a willow that grew at the edge of the kitchen garden on the boy's 6th birthday with a small, clean knife that she had sterilized in advance, and she had presented it to him in a long, thin box wrapped in green ribbon. He had opened the box. He had looked at the stick. What is it? It is for practice, Alice said. It is not magic. It is a stick. But it is the size and weight of a wand, more or less, and you will need to know what it is like to have something in your hand for the rest of your life that you can use to do a thing. So I cut you a stick. Alice. Yes. Can I do magic with it? Number it is a stick. But you can do with a stick a great many things that magic cannot, and that is also an important thing to know. He held it up. He looked along its length the way he had seen Carlyle look along a needle. He weighed it in his palm. He moved it through the air. He laughed. I like it. I knew you would. She did not tell him that day that she had foreseen exactly which wand would choose him at the age of 11, and that it was 12.5 inches long and made of holly, and that she had cut the willow stick to be 12.5 inches long and very close to the weight of holly, because she wanted his hand to be ready for it. She did not tell him she had been planning the gift for 6 years. She did not tell him that the green ribbon was the same green as his eyes, because she had matched them in the dressmaker's shop in Seattle the week before. She let him hold the stick. She let him think it was just a stick. She also took him in the 6th year to Seattle. They went on the train. Alice had told him about the train for 3 weeks in advance, and she had drawn for him a picture of the train and a picture of the seats on the train and a picture of the dining car of the train. And when they boarded the train on the morning of his 6th birthday plus 17 days, the boy walked down the aisle with the small grave nod he had at the things he had been promised and given, and he sat in the seat she had drawn for him, and he ate in the dining car. The small chocolate sundae she had foreseen for him at 4:11 in the afternoon, and he had been polite and quiet and well-behaved the entire time, because Alice had spent 6 years preparing him for the kinds of moments in which a child might be unable to be polite and quiet and well-behaved, and she had taught him without him knowing she was teaching him. In Seattle, they went to 4 shops. They bought, between them, 14 items of clothing. The 14 items had been foreseen down to the small white buttons on the cuffs of the third one. They went home on the evening train. Alice held him asleep in her lap from Tacoma to Olympia, and she did not move for an hour and 41 minutes. And when Esme met them at the platform in the rain at Fork Station, the boy was awake again and clutching a bag with his 14 new items in it and grinning the wide grin he had got from Emmett, and he said, before Esme could say anything, "Mama, I went on a train." Year 7. Jasper, the 7th year, was the year of the War Games. Jasper had decided, in the 2nd month of the 7th year, that the boy was old enough to be told the truth about the war Jasper had fought in. He sat the boy down in the parlor on the floor, with a box of small painted figures Jasper had carved out of cedar over the previous winter, and he laid out on the rug a field of small green felt squares and a small blue line that was a river, and he showed the boy where the lines had been on a morning in May in 1862, when Jasper had been a man, and what the men on those lines had done. He did not tell the boy about the killing. He did not tell the boy what the boy was not yet old enough to be told. He told him about the choices that had been made, what had been chosen well and what had been chosen badly, and why. He told him about the fear that had moved through the field of men like a wind, and how a captain could feel the wind and choose what to do with it. He told him about the small private practice he had developed in the years before he had been turned, of breathing in and out at the speed of the men around him in order to know what they were about to do. The boy listened with the small grave face he had at serious things. After the lesson, Jasper asked him, "What do you think?" "I think," said the boy, "that you were very young." Jasper looked at the boy for a long moment. "I was," he said. "I think," said the boy, "that the men were very afraid." "Yes." "I think you were also afraid, Jasper." "Yes." "I think it is a good thing you came home." Jasper did not then say anything. He picked up one of the small cedar figures, a soldier with a small painted blue cap, and he turned it in his fingers, and he looked at the small grave face of the 7-year-old boy who had said the thing he had said, and he felt, with the gift he had been carrying for 117 years, the absolute clear unforced affection of the boy in the room, and he understood that what he had been given, in this family, in this house, in this year, was a thing he had not believed himself entitled to. "Yes, Harry," he said, "it is a good thing I came home." Esme, in the kitchen, had been listening. She did not come in, she did not interrupt. She stood at the counter with her hands flat on the wood, and she let her 2 boys talk on the rug in the parlor, and she felt in her chest the thing she had felt in the clearing and the kitchen and the rocking chair and every important moment of the 7 years since, and she let it pass through her without naming it. Years 8, 9, and 10, the years that followed, went by in the family's reckoning, the way slow weather goes by. They were good years. They were not without their difficulties. The boy had a long fever in the 8th year that frightened Carlyle. The boy broke his wrist in the 9th year falling from the cliff he could now climb in his sleep. The boy had a small quiet crying spell in the 10th year about a thing he would not tell any of them, and that Esme rocked him through without asking. But the difficulties were the difficulties of a child growing up in a house where he was loved, and Esme moved through them the way a riverbed moves through water, which is by being the thing the water flows over. She did not change. She remained in those 3 years the same as she had been in the rocking chair on the first night. The litany of names continued. The bottle had given way to a cup. The cup had given way, by the 9th year, to a thermos he carried in his school bag, because the boy had begun, in the 7th year, to go to a small private school in Forks, where he was the strange, quiet boy with the green eyes and the lightning scar. and he had become, in 2 years, the strange, quiet boy in the school who was also the boy the other children were most likely to come to with a scraped knee or a problem that needed a fair word said about it. Esme had not had to teach him this. Esme had only had to be a thing he could go home to. Each Cullen had his year, and his year, when it ended, did not end. Carlyle continued the medical book, year by year, until it was 400 pages thick by the boy's 10th birthday and bound in green leather by Alice with the boy's name on the cover. Edward continued the lullaby, which had 4 movements now and was still not finished. Rosalie continued the wolf rule, which the boy obeyed, and Rosalie continued the garden, which fed the boy and the boy's school friends and sometimes the priest at the small white church in town. Emmett continued the cliff, and added to it in the 9th year the high alder branch with the swing, and the long deep pool in the river above the bend. Alice continued the clothes, and added to it the music she chose for him to listen to, and the books she chose for him to read, and the way the house was put together for the small good moments she had seen coming. Jasper continued, every 2 weeks, the small lesson on the rug, and added to it in the 10th year the first conversation about the war he had fought in that included the killing, and the boy listened and the boy did not flinch, and Jasper did not have to make the air softer, because the boy had grown into a person whose air did not need softening. Esme continued to be Esme. She continued the rocking chair, although the boy was too big for it by the 8th year and sat on the floor at her feet, or with his head against her knee instead of in her lap. She continued the song her mother had sung. She continued the litany of names. She continued the moss-colored sweater, which had been mended 7 times by Alice over the 10 years, and which had become, by the boy's 10th birthday, a thing of patches and ghosts, and the cumulative scent of 10 years of being held and crying and laughed into and walked through the woods of Forks Inn, and she would not, ever, replace it. The boy was 10 years and 10 months old on the morning the letter came. He was at the kitchen table eating a piece of toast. His mother was at the counter putting jam in a jar. The kitchen smelled of toast and jam and the wet cedar of the November morning, and the lamp above the table was on because the morning was the kind of November morning that does not, on the coast of Washington, ever quite become light. The boy was reading a book that his sister Alice had ordered for him out of the catalog of a small bookstore in Portland. The book was about astronomy. The boy was on page 43. The page had a diagram of the asteroid belt. There was a small, clean knock at the door. It was not the knock of a person who lived there. It was the knock of an owl. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The letter and the goodbye. The owl was a barn owl. It was the color of pale wheat with a heart-shaped face the color of pale paper, and it had ridden the wind across the Atlantic and the great breadth of the continent for 6 days, and it perched on the kitchen windowsill with its feathers ruffled by the rain and its yellow eyes fixed on the boy at the kitchen table. It had a letter in its beak. The letter was heavy parchment, folded in 3, sealed with a circle of wax the color of old port, and the wax bore the impression of 4 animals around the letter H. Esme set down the jar of jam. The boy set down the book about asteroids. Neither of them moved for a moment. They had been told on this day that the owl would come, because Alice had seen it coming 12 days ago and had told the family at breakfast and had moved on in her usual way to the question of what should be served for lunch. But Alice's foresight, in the way of all foresights, was a thing the family heard and put away, and the owl on the windowsill at this moment was not a thing the family had heard about. It was a thing that was happening. "Mama," said the boy. "I see it, my love. It is the owl, yes. It has a letter, yes. Should I open the window? Yes." He stood up from the table. He was tall for 10. the height of a normal 12-year-old. With dark hair he had let grow long the way Edward let his grow long, and green eyes behind the round glasses Carlyle had fitted him for in the 8th year, and the scar shaped like lightning at his forehead where the dark hair fell away from it. He crossed the kitchen on his bare feet. He opened the window. The owl hopped onto his wrist lightly, the way an owl hops, and laid the letter into his palm. It looked at him. He looked at it. "Thank you," he said. He had been brought up to thank people, including birds. The owl hooted very softly once, and then it lifted off his wrist and flew across the kitchen to perch on the cupboard above the stove. It folded its wings. It closed one eye. It appeared to be settling in for a long stay. The boy turned the letter over in his hand. He had been told what was on it before he turned it over. He had been told what was on it for 10 years. He had grown up knowing that, on a morning in November of the year he turned 11, a letter would come from a school in Scotland that would address him by a name. The name was Mr. H. Cullen. He had been told this. He had practiced reading it in the 3rd year after he had learned his letters, on a piece of cream paper Carlyle had set out for him as a game. He read it now. The handwriting was green ink in a hand that was not Aberforth's. It said, "Mr. H. Cullen, the White House on the River Road, 3rd bedroom on the ground floor, FORKS, Washington." He looked at his mother. "It knows my room." "Yes," Esme said. "Carlyle told me they would." They write the address as the boy stands when the letter is sent. They have done it for 900 years. They are not, as a rule, off by a corridor. "Mama." "Yes, my love. I would like to open it with everyone." "Yes." So they waited. They waited until evening, because the family was scattered. Carlyle at the hospital, Edward and Jasper in Seattle for a concert, Emmett and Rosalie down the coast for a long weekend that Rosalie had been planning, Alice in the upstairs bedroom finishing a stitch on a small jacket. She had foreseen the boy would need at the airport in 3 weeks. And the family gathered, in 2s and 3s, through the long gray afternoon. And by 6 o'clock, all 7 of them were in the dining room at the cherry table where the vote had been taken 10 years before. The boy sat at the head. It was the chair Carlyle had sat in. Carlyle had stood up from it when the boy had come into the dining room with the letter in his hand. And Carlyle had walked the long way around the table to the seat at the foot. And Carlyle had pulled out the head chair for his son. And Esme had watched her husband do this and had not said anything, because the gesture had not needed saying. Carlyle had moved the head of the table in a way Carlyle never moved anything which was without consulting her, because Carlyle had known, 10 years and 48 days before, that the head of the table would, on this evening, belong to the boy. The boy opened the letter. He read it aloud. He read it in the small, clear voice he had used as a child for serious things, and that he had grown up still using. He read out the headmaster's name, which he had been told for 10 years. He read out the deputy's name. He read out the list of required books. He read out the list of required equipment. He read out the small sentence at the bottom that said term begins the 1st of September. We await your owl by no later than the 31st of July. When he was done, he set the letter down on the table. He looked at his family. His family looked at him. The clock above the stove in the kitchen ticked. Esme said, "I am proud of you," he said. "Mama, I haven't done anything." "You have done 11 years of being yourself," she said, "which is the only thing in the world I require of you, and you have done it well, and I am proud of you." He looked at her for a long moment. His green eyes did the thing they did when he was about to say a thing he had been thinking for a long time and had not yet found the words for. He said, finally, "I would like to go." "I know you would, my love. I would like to come home also." "You will. You will come home every summer. You will come home every Christmas. You will come home every Easter if Aberforth can arrange it, and he says he can. You will be at this school for 9 months a year, and you will be in this house for 3, and you will be ours for both, and you will not in any of the months be alone." He nodded. "Carlyle." "Yes, son." "How do we get there, the books and the things?" Carlyle smiled. It was the small smile Carlyle did when he had been waiting to be asked a question and was glad to be asked it. "We will take the family jet to Heathrow," he said. "Aberforth will meet us at the airport. Aberforth will take you and your mother and me to a street in London that you cannot see unless you are with a wizard. We will buy your books and your equipment in the street. We will eat lunch at the Leaky Cauldron. We will spend 2 days in London being tourists. Then we will go to a small house Aberforth has rented for us in the village near the school, and we will spend a week with you there before the 1st of September. On the 1st of September we will put you on the train. We will come back to America the day after." The boy considered this. "All of you," he said, "all 7 of us, yes. On the jet, yes. In England, yes. And then you will go home and I will go to school. Yes. And next summer I will come back. Yes." He nodded. He had wanted, she thought, to hear the sequence of it spoken aloud, to have the shape of it laid down on the table so that he could see it, and now he had seen it and he was satisfied. He picked up the letter. He folded it back into thirds. He put it into the inner pocket of the small wool jacket Alice had made him for the autumn, and he stood up. "I am going to write the answer," he said. "Yes." He went down the hall to his room. He shut the door, but not all the way, in the way he always did. The family heard, from where they sat, the small, clean sounds of a boy pulling a chair up to a desk, opening a drawer, taking out a pen. They heard him think for a moment. They heard him begin to write. Esme put both her hands flat on the table. She did not speak for a long time. "It is the end," she said finally. "It is the end of one thing," Carlyle said. "Yes. It is the beginning of another. Yes. It is not the end of his being ours. I know that. He will come back. I know that, Esme. I know, Carlyle, I know all of it. Let me have a moment to feel it. I have been a mother for 10 years. I will not in the next 10 weeks learn to be less of one." He did not say anything. He reached across the table for her hand. She gave him her hand. Alice, from the foot of the table, said very softly, "He will be back in 8 months and 2 weeks. He will be 6 inches taller. He will be brown from the sun on the Scottish lakes. He will have a thing in his bag that he will give Esme that I cannot quite see yet, but it is round and small, and it is yours, Esme, before he has bought it." Esme looked at her daughter for a long time. "Thank you, Alice." "You are welcome, Mama." Rosalie stood up. "I am going to start packing," she said. "It is November," said Edward. "He leaves the 17th of August." "I am going to start packing," said Rosalie, "because if I do not start packing tonight, I will start crying. I do not cry, Edward, but I will start tonight, and I would prefer to pack." She left the room. Edward did not say anything. He stood up also, and he went, in the direction of the small ground-floor room where the piano had stood for 10 years, and the family heard, in the next minute, the opening phrase of the lullaby that had not yet been finished, and that, on this evening, was perhaps about to be. Emmett and Jasper went to the porch. Alice sat at the foot of the table. Esme and Carlyle stayed at the head, with their hands together, and the boy in the next room writing his answer in the careful round hand he had learned in the 3rd grade at the small private school in Forks. The owl on the cupboard above the stove had closed both eyes now and appeared to be asleep. The summer came. It came the way summers came on the coast of Washington, which was slowly and not really, and with a great deal of warning. The rains continued through May. The first dry day was the 11th of June. By the 2nd week of July, the long meadows north of the ridge were yellow with mustard flower, and the boy, who had grown 2 inches between May and July, was walking the meadows in the evenings with his mother, the 2 of them in their bare feet, the boy with a switch of willow in his hand, because the boy had a habit of carrying a switch when he walked, the way Aberforth had described his own father carrying a switch when he had walked the moors of Mull, 60 years before he had been put in prison. They had taken to talking in those walks about everything, It was not a thing they had decided. It was a thing that had happened. The boy had been a child of small grave silences for 10 years, and the silences had been the silences of a child who was thinking, and Esme had let the silences alone, because she had known they were not the silences of a child who was lonely. Now, in the summer of the 11th year, the silences had given way to talk, and the boy had begun, on those evening walks, to tell his mother the things he had been silent about. He told her about the small dreams of green light he still had. Sometimes, on certain nights in late October, he told her about the boy at the school in Forks who had a father who hit him, and what the boy had told him about it, and what the boy had asked him not to tell, and how he had broken the asking by telling, that summer, his mother. He told her about the long thoughts he had had about what kind of magic he wanted to learn at the school in Scotland. He told her about the kind of magic he did not want to learn, although he could not yet say why. She listened. She listened the way she had been listening to him for 10 years. She did not interrupt. She did not advise. She offered when he stopped. The small, clean responses she had learned were the responses he wanted. A hand on his shoulder, a yes, and I am glad you told me. She did not in any of the walks weep. She had still not learned how, but the thing in her chest that had been there since the clearing was very full on those evening walks, and she let it pass through her, again and again, without naming it. On the 2nd of August she went into his room. He was packing. He had been packing on and off for 2 weeks. Rosalie had bought him, in the 3rd week of July, a trunk. The trunk was a heavy old leather thing that Rosalie had found in a shop in Port Angels, and Rosalie had refitted the hinges and oiled the leather, and lined the inside with the moss-green silk she had bought for the lining of her own wedding dress in 1933, and had never used. The trunk sat open on the floor of his room, half full, with the books on one side and the clothes on the other, and a small empty space in the middle where the things he had not yet decided about would go. Esme sat on the bed. She watched him pack a sweater. She watched him pack a pair of trousers. She watched him pack the green hat Alice had made him in the first week of his life. He had not in 11 years outgrown the hat, because Alice had foreseen all of the sizes his head would ever be and had made the hat to fit each of them in turn, because the hat had been, on the inside, a great many hats sewn one inside another, the way the layers of an onion go. "You are taking the hat," she said. "Yes, Mama." "Good." He came over to the bed. He sat down beside her. He was, at 11, very nearly as tall as she was. His head, when he sat next to her on the bed, came up to the bridge of her nose. He smelled of the boy he was and the boy he had been, which had been, for 11 years, the smell of milk and salt and the wet damp blanket and the wrongness that was not wrongness, the smell of him, the smell that had not changed in any of the years and would not change in any of the years to come, because some things about a person, she had learned, are the things about them, and the smell of him was one of those things. "Mama." "Yes, I am afraid." "Yes, I am not afraid of the school." "I am afraid of 9 months." "Yes." She put her arm around his shoulders. She held him against her side. He was too big for it. He let her do it anyway. He had been letting her do it, the small, unnecessary motherings, for years, because he was, at heart, a kind boy, and he had understood from very young that the motherings were for her as much as for him. "You will have letters," she said. "You will have an owl of your own. We are buying you one in Diagon Alley. You will write to me every Sunday. I will write to you every Sunday. Aberforth has told me there is a thing called a two-way mirror that I do not understand, that he is going to give us as a going-away gift. That lets us see each other across the sea. You will not be alone. You will be at a school with 300 other children, and you will have professors, and you will have a brother named Aberforth in the village below the castle, and you will, in the 2nd year, have a Christmas at home." "Mama." "Yes, I know all of that. Yes, I am afraid anyway." She tightened her arm around him. "Yes," she said, "you are afraid because you love us. You would be afraid if you were leaving for 1 week. You are not afraid because you do not know what is coming. You are afraid because what is coming is a thing you have not done before, and we have done it together, all our other firsts. This is your first that you will do without us. He did not say anything for a moment. Will you be afraid, Mama? She looked at him. She had decided a long time ago that she would not lie to him. Yes, she said. He nodded. He put his head against her shoulder. The two of them sat on the bed for a long time while the late August sun came through the window and fell on the half-full trunk on the floor of his room, and neither of them spoke. The flight to Heathrow was on the 17th. The Cullen jet was a Gulfstream II that Carlyle had owned, through one of his medical foundations since 1974. It was painted white. It had 8 seats. It had, on the cabin wall above the seat the boy sat in, a small framed photograph that Esme had not noticed before, but that, she discovered halfway across the Atlantic, was the photograph Rosalie had taken of all 8 of them on the porch of the White House on the River Road in the spring of the boy's 4th year. Rosalie had put it there, very quietly, on the morning of the flight. The boy looked at the photograph for a long time. He did not say anything. He took, after a while, the small notebook he had been writing in for 2 months out of his coat pocket, and he wrote a thing in it and he put it away. Esme did not ask. She would not ask. The notebook was his. Aberforth met them at Heathrow. He looked in the 8.5 years since he had last visited the White House exactly the same. He wore the same tin-colored coat. His beard was the same long white. His eyes were the same tired blue. He nodded at Carlyle and he nodded at Esme and he nodded at the rest of them, and then he stopped in front of the boy. He looked at the boy for a long moment. The boy looked back. "Lad," Aberforth said. "Sir," said the boy, "you've grown." "Yes, sir." "You've grown into yourself. Mama says so. Your mama is correct." He held out his hand. The boy shook it. The shake was the shake of 2 grown men. The shake was a thing Aberforth had been waiting 11 years to do, and a thing the boy did with the small grave courtesy he did everything serious with. And Esme, behind her son, watched them shake hands across the great gulf between her son's old world and his new, and she did not weep, because she had still not learned how. Diagon Alley was a thing the family had been preparing for. It was, when they walked into it through the back of the leaky cauldron, the precise thing Alice had described it as to the boy on the kitchen floor in March. A cobbled street about half a mile long, with shops on both sides, and signs in gold lettering, and a great white marble building at the far end that the boy had been told was a bank. The street was crowded. It was the last weekend before term began, and there were children of every age in robes of every house, with their parents in tow, and there were owls and there were trunks, and there were the kinds of small smells of food the boy had not, in 11 years, encountered. Butter beer and pumpkin pasties, and the small fried things from the cart at the corner of Nocturne that the boy was, on Esme's mild instruction, not to approach. They bought, in Diagon Alley, every item on the boys' list. They bought the cauldron in pewter, the scales in brass, the gloves in dragon hide. They bought the books at Flourish and Blots. The boy carried them himself, in the small stack that had been put into a paper bag, and they bought, at Madame Malkin's, 3 sets of plain black robes with the boy's name embroidered on the inside of the collar by Alice, while the boy stood on the small wooden stool and held very still. They bought the wand at Ollivander's. The boy was in the shop for 47 minutes. He tried, in those minutes, 14 wands. The 14th wand was holly, 11 inches, with a core of phoenix feather. Esme stood at the back of the shop with her hands folded against her chest, and she watched her son lift the wand off the counter, and she watched the green sparks come out of the end of it, and she watched her son turn to her with his green eyes wide, and his small face lit from underneath by the green sparks, and she thought, "This is what magic looks like." This is what it looks like in the hand of a boy whose mother has loved him for 11 years. Mr. Ollivander, behind the counter, did the thing Mr. Ollivander did, which was to look at the boy in the long, uncomfortable way Mr. Ollivander looked at everyone, and to say, in his small, dry voice, "I had wondered, Mr. Cullen, when this wand would find its way to you. It has been waiting some little time." He charged them 7 galleons. Carlyle paid in cash. They left the shop. The boy carried the wand in a long, thin box. He held the box with both hands, the way he had held the willow stick Alice had given him at 6. They bought at Eolip's an owl. It was a snowy owl. It was the color of the snow above Lake Crescent in February, and it had yellow eyes very like the wolf's that Rosalie had stared down on the river road 7 years before, and the boy named her, before they had left the shop, Hedwig. The owl on the cupboard above the stove in November had been a barn owl, and that owl had carried his letter back to the school and had stayed at the white house on the river road through the winter, and had become, in the spring, a thing he had loved. The barn owl had died in May, peacefully, on the windowsill, the way old owls do. The boy had buried it in the garden behind the kitchen with a small flat stone for a marker. He had cried very quietly that day, with Esme on the porch step behind him. Hedwig was, in a way Esme could not have said why, a thing the boy needed in the same way he had needed the barn owl, and a thing he had been ready to find, and a thing Alice had foreseen the white of 3 months ago when she had bought the matching white ribbon for the cage. The owl took the trip to the leaky cauldron in the cage with great dignity. She looked at the family through the bars of the cage as if she were considering them. She landed on Esme's shoulder in the small parlor at the leaky cauldron on the 3rd try. She stayed there for nearly an hour. Esme held very still, with her hands in her lap, and the owl on her shoulder, and the boy at the table across the room laughing at something Emmett had said, and the small fire in the grate, and the sound of the cobbled street outside the window, and she understood, with the absolute clarity she had had only a few times in her unlife, that the owl was a thing of her son's, and that the owl had come to her shoulder because the owl had recognized her as the one her son loved most. And she let the owl stay until the owl decided to go. The week at the village house was a week she would not let herself catalogue. She walked with the boy along the lake. She watched him try a broom. Aberforth had borrowed one for him from a friend, on the grass behind the house, and the boy had risen on it the first time he had touched it, and Esme had stood very still on the grass and watched her son go up into the August sky for the first time, and the thing in her chest had been the largest thing she had ever felt in her unlife, and she had let it pass through her without naming it. She sat with him in the evenings, by the fire, and they read, the two of them, from the small book of Yeats that Alice had packed in the trunk, because the boy had taken in the 10th year to reading Yeats. She made him on the last night the soup Rosalie had been making since the first week of his life, with the chicken and the rice and the carrots and the onion and the small handful of thyme, and they ate it together, the boy at the small wooden table and Esme across from him with the empty plate she had set for herself out of habit. She did not eat. She watched him eat. He did not ask why. He had known since he was 2 that his mother did not eat the food in the kitchen, and he had loved her for it. On the morning of the 1st of September, the family went to King's Cross. They took 2 black cars from the village. They drove the 4 hours to London. They arrived at the station with an hour to spare, because Alice had told them 3 weeks ago that the trolley one needed to push the trunk and the owl cage on was a thing that took practice, and the boy had wanted to practice, and they had honored the wanting. He pushed the trolley the length of the platform. He pushed it back. He pushed it in a small circle. Hedwig, on top of the trunk, did the thing owls do when they are being pushed in circles, which was to look at the wall and to bear it. They went through the barrier at platform 9 3/4 one at a time, because the family had been told that a group of 8 going through at once would be noticed, and the family had agreed not to be noticed. The boy went last with Esme. Esme had her hand on his shoulder. The boy looked up at her briefly in the second before the barrier, and his green eyes did the thing they did when he was about to say a thing he had been thinking for a long time, but he did not this time say it. He looked at her. She looked at him. They went through the barrier. The platform was full of children and parents and trunks and owls and cats and the great red engine of the Hogwarts Express, breathing steam into the high glass ceiling. The family had not in any of the 11 years seen anything like it. The boys stood in a small ring at the edge of the platform and watched, and the boy watched also, and Esme watched her son watch. "Mama," he said. "Yes, I have to go." "Yes." He turned. He hugged Emmett. He hugged Jasper. He hugged Edward. He hugged Carlisle. He hugged Alice. He hugged Rosalie, and Rosalie held him for the half-second longer than was natural, the way Rosalie held all things she would not let go of, and then she let him go. He came to Esme last. He put his arms around her. He was 11 years and 10 months old. He was the height of her shoulder. He was the boy she had carried in a basket out of a clearing through a wet wood 11 years before. He was the boy whose first laugh she had heard in the kitchen on a small Tuesday morning. He was the boy who had said the word mine at 1 year 10 months with his small fist on the wool of her sweater. He said into the wool of the sweater she had not in 11 years replaced, "I love you, Mama. I love you, my son, every day, every minute of every day, even when I am not in the room you are in, especially then. I will write. I know. I will come home at Christmas. I know. I will not be a different boy when I come back. I know that too. Be a good boy, be a kind boy, be the boy I have known. Do not lose him." "No, Mama. Go." He let her go. He took 2 steps back. He looked at her. He turned and he walked to the train and he climbed up the iron steps and he turned at the top of the steps and waved once, the small grave wave he had at serious things, and then he disappeared into the train. The whistle blew. The train moved. Esme stood on the platform with her family on either side of her, and she did not move and she did not look away, and she watched the train pull out of the station, and the train turned the bend at the end of the platform, and she could no longer see the boy, and the train was gone. She stood for another minute. Then she said very softly the litany of the names. Carlisle, Edward, Rosalie, Emmett, Alice, Jasper. She stopped. She did not say the 7th name, because the 7th name was the only one not on the platform with her, and she would not, in the next 9 months, say the 7th name in a litany. She would say it in letters and in mirror conversations, and at the dining table at 3 in the morning when the rest of the family had gone to do other things, and she sat alone with the cup of cold coffee she had poured because human kitchens have coffee, and the kitchen of a vampire mother of a wizard boy was a human kitchen now in his absence. Carlisle put his hand on her back. "Home, my love," he said. She nodded. They walked, the 7 of them, off the platform back through the barrier, into the great busy normal hall of King's Cross, where 1,000 humans were going on with their lives in the small, ordinary ways humans went on, and not one of them knew that, on the platform behind them, a woman who had been a mother for 11 years had just put her son onto a train and was walking now into the second long unmotherhood of her unlife, which would last 9 months and not a day longer. Because 9 months from now she would be back at this station, and her son would walk off the train and into her arms, and the unmotherhood would end again. She had been a mother for 11 years. She would, she understood as the cars pulled away from King's Cross toward the airport and the jet and the long flight home, be a mother for the rest of her unlife. It was the last decision she had not yet known she had made. Chapter 6, in Chapter 7. Esme at Hogwarts, Year 4. The vision came to Alice on the jet at 39,000 feet above the central Atlantic, at 13 minutes past 3 in the morning, Greenwich, while the boy at Hogwarts, whom the family had been crossing the ocean to surprise, because the third task of the Triwizard Tournament was to be held that evening, And because the 7 of them had decided in a single 7-second silence around the breakfast table the previous morning that they would not, this time, watch through Aberforth's mirror, but through their own eyes, was, in the same instant, walking out of the great hall under a sky the color of a smith's anvil, with a green cup in his palm that had, in the next breath, begun to burn. Alice screamed. She had not in 54 years of foresight screamed at a vision. She had wept. She had laughed. She had stood up suddenly from a kitchen chair and walked into another room without speaking. She had not screamed. The cabin of the jet went still around the sound. The pilot in the cockpit did not look back, because the pilot had been told the 8 of them in the cabin were to be allowed any noises they made, but he tightened his hands on the yoke because there are sounds a man's hand tightens at without his telling it to. Edward was beside her in a half-second. "Alice." "What?" She did not answer. Her eyes were the wide white gold of a vision that had not finished arriving. Her hands were rigid on the armrests. Her mouth was open. She was not looking at anything in the cabin and not at anything outside the small black window that lay against the night. "Alice." "Edward, he is in a graveyard." "Whose?" "I do not know. There are headstones. There is a stone angel. There is a man on the ground with him who is bleeding out. There is a man who is not yet a man. There is—" Edward, the cup was a portkey. The cup was a trap. The cup took him to a graveyard, and the man on the ground is the Diggory boy and the other man. She stopped. She had stopped because her hands had let go of the armrests and her right hand had risen, of its own accord, to her mouth, in the way a vision goes that has begun to show you the thing the vision has been refusing to show you for hours. Edward read what Alice was seeing. The cabin of the jet went very still, in the way a cabin goes still when one of the 7 people in it has just understood, faster than the other 6, that the world that had been the world an hour ago was no longer that world. Edward turned. He looked at Esme. Esme sat at the front of the cabin in the moss-green coat she had bought for the trip, and the silver locket the boy had given her at Christmas. The round, small thing Alice had foreseen in the kitchen on the day the Hogwarts letter had come. And her gold eyes were on Edward's gold eyes, and the 2 of them did not speak for the space of one heartbeat. That was not the heartbeat of any human in the cabin, because there were no humans in the cabin. Only the 8 of them and the air around them and the great cold dark sea 3 miles below. "Esme," Edward said, "tell me. He is alive. Tell me the rest." He told her. He told her in the small, clean sentences he used for the worst of the things he told her, the sentences that had been built over 70 years, for the carrying of the worst news the way a stretcher is built for the carrying of a man with a broken spine. Spare, exact, level, without poetry. He told her of the graveyard at Little Hangleton, of the worm-tailed man on the ground with the knife, of the great bone-cold cauldron, and the small thing in the cauldron that was the shape of a child, and was not a child. He told her of Cedric Diggory, fallen in the second between the cup landing and the boy understanding where the cup had taken him. He told her of the rising of the thing from the cauldron, the bone-white head, the slit-pupil eyes, the long-fingered hands, the absence of nose in the long, pale face. He told her the thing had a name. He told her the name. "Voldemort," he said. Esme did not move for a moment. She had not in 11 years said the name aloud in the white house on the river road. Carlyle had said it. Aberforth had said it. The boy, when he had begun, at 6, to ask about the woman with red hair he had seen in his dreams, had said it. Esme had not. She had not, in 11 years, allowed the name to be the name of a person at all. It had been in her mouth the name of a weather, a thing that had come, one night, and had broken her son's life, and had cast him from the small wooden house in Godric's Hollow into a basket in a clearing in the wet woods of the Olympic Peninsula. A storm has no name in the mouth of the woman whose son the storm has put on her porch. Now the storm had a face. Now the storm had a name. Now the storm had pulled her son away from the cup at the center of a maze in the foothills of Scotland and put him in a graveyard in the south of England with a knife at his arm and a thing rising out of a cauldron beside him. And now the storm was a man. And now the storm had at last become the kind of thing Esme could put her hands on. She unbuckled the belt across her hips. She stood up. She walked the length of the cabin to the cockpit door. She opened the cockpit door. She did not speak to the pilot. She did not need to. She looked at the instrument panel. She read off the altitude, the heading, the airspeed, and the small clock above the throttle quadrant that gave the time over the airframe at 6 minutes past 4 Greenwich. She read the fuel gauge. She read the chart on the co-pilot's lap. She did one of the things her mind had taught itself to do over 97 years, which was to look at a great many small numbers at once and compose them into a single number. And the single number she composed was the number of minutes between her and Hogwarts, and the number was 417. It was a number too large. She turned. She walked back into the cabin. She crossed to the door at the rear, where the small spiral staircase went down to the luggage hold, and she put her hand on the handle of the door. She did not open it. She closed her eyes. She thought very precisely, with the clean small calculation she did her embroidery with, of the airspeed of the jet and the speed of her own legs and the curvature of the earth and the height of the falling and the temperature of the air at 39,000 feet, and the latitude of the small island of the Outer Hebrides toward which they would, in the next 40 minutes, be passing. She turned around. Carlyle was at the front of the cabin. He had stood when she had stood. His gold eyes were on her face. His hand was on the small leather case in which he kept the things he kept for emergencies. Carlyle, yes, I am going on ahead. He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. Alice, he said without turning around, is the storm going to land at Hogwarts? Yes, Alice said from her seat behind him. Her voice had become her voice again. It had also become, in the space of 3 minutes, a voice the family had not heard before. It was small. It was steady. It was the voice of a person who had seen the next 12 hours laid out like a chart on a table, and who had begun, already, to work the chart. He will go back to Hogwarts. The boy will get the cup again. The boy will take the body of Cedric, and he will take himself back to the maze. Voldemort will follow within an hour. He will arrive on the Hogwarts grounds at 5 minutes after midnight local. There is a man at the school who has been waiting for him. The man is wearing the face of one of the boy's teachers. The man will hand the boy to Voldemort on the lawn outside the maze. I cannot see what happens after that because there is a hole in the picture and the hole has my mother's shape. She opened her eyes. She looked at Esme. "Mama," she said. "Go." Esme opened the rear door. The cabin pressure equalized in a long, quiet hiss that the other 7 heard, and the cold air of the upper atmosphere came into the cabin, and Esme stepped, very calmly, out into the air. The air was not air, at 39,000 feet, in any way that mattered to her. It was a thin, cold, soundless medium that she fell through, and she fell, and she turned twice on her own axis, the way an arrow turns in a wind, and she chose a heading by the small bright lights of the Hebrides on the dark sea below her, and she gave herself to the falling, and the falling was a thing she had not done before, and she found that she was, in the falling, calm. The jet flew on without her. She fell for 11 minutes. She hit the sea 2 miles off Stornoway at a speed that would have killed any creature on Earth that was not a vampire, and she went down 140 feet into the cold black water, and she turned, and she came up, and she broke the surface in a small clean column of foam, and she swam. She swam east. She swam at the speed of a thing that did not need to breathe, and did not feel the cold, and had 200 miles of water, and 1/3 of a continent of land between her, and the only thing in the world that mattered. She swam under the great rolling sea and through the kelp and the cold black rock, and she came up at the small stone harbor of Stornoway in the 14th minute, and she ran. She ran across Lewis. She ran across the Minch by swimming again, because she did not have a boat and would not stop to take one. And she came out on the Skye coast at 5 3/4 minutes after midnight, and she ran across Skye, and she crossed to the mainland by way of the long bridge at Kyle, where the wind off the loch lifted the wet hair off her cheek and laid the cold of the Atlantic across her face, and she ran south through the great empty country, the Knoydart and the Glenfinnan and the long pale road past Mallaig. And she ran the length of the western highlands at a speed that the country had not seen since the wolves of the Iron Age. And the moon over the Cairngorms was the same moon that was over the Hogwarts grounds, and the boy under that moon was the only thing in her life that had ever made her run. She crossed the wards of Hogwarts at 27 minutes past midnight. The wards did not stop her. The wards had been built in the year 994 by 4 wizards and a great deal of magic, against the 7 things the 4 wizards had been able to think of at the time, and a vampire mother running at the speed of a meteor through the heather toward a sun was not, even on a long list, one of those 7 things. The wards rippled around her as she crossed them. They tasted her. They tasted in her the absence of any intent that the wards had been built to keep out. They let her pass. The boy, the very long-dead architect of the eastern third of the wards, who had been a kindly old man named Helga Hufflepuff's husband, would have approved if anyone had remained to ask him. She came onto the lawn of Hogwarts at 28 minutes past midnight. The lawn was full of people. It was full of the way people are when a thing has happened on a lawn that the people on the lawn had not been expecting. The third task had been ended, somehow, in the air above the maze, and the boy at the center of the maze had been taken, somehow, by a thing the people had not yet identified, and a great many people on the lawn were running in a great many different directions, and the headmaster of the school was at the small wooden platform near the maze with the headmistress of the school and the deputy headmaster and a small ring of people in dark robes, and the headmaster's face was the face of a man who had not, in his 114 years, been afraid before. He was afraid now. Esme did not stop to speak to him. She did not need to. She had heard in the half-mile before the lawn what no one else on the lawn had yet heard, which was the small, thin sound of her son's heart, beating at the rate it beat when he was afraid, beating at the rate of a hare in a hawk's shadow, beating from the small wooden platform at the edge of the maze where the boy was crouched in the grass with his hand on the chest of the dead boy Cedric Diggory, and his other hand on the green cup, and his green eyes wide and full of a horror that was older than him, and his small lightning-marked forehead drawn down in the face of a child who had become, in the last 31 minutes, a man. She crossed the lawn in 2 seconds. She did not announce herself. She did not call his name. She came in at the side of the platform low and quiet and quick, in the way an animal comes to its child when the herd is in panic, and the child does not yet know which way to run. And she went around behind him, and she put one hand flat between his shoulder blades, the small light pressure she had been putting between his shoulder blades for 11 years to tell him she was there. And the boy froze for a half-second, in the way a child freezes when a hand has been put on him that he had not expected. And then the boy understood whose hand it was, and his small body collapsed back against her, and he turned and he looked up. "Mama, my love." He did not weep. He did not speak again. He looked at her with the wide green eyes that had been her son's eyes for 11 years, and his small face was streaked with the dirt of the maze and the salt of the long ride back, and his hand on Cedric's chest was still, and his hand on the cup was still, and the small lightning scar above his right eye was very pink against the dirt of his cheek. She put her arms around him. She did not lift him. She knew not to. He was a 14-year-old boy in shock who had just watched a friend die, and he did not need to be lifted. He needed to be held, and she held him, on her knees on the grass at the edge of the platform, and she put her cheek against the crown of his head, and she breathed the smell of him, the smell of milk and salt and the wet damp blanket and the wrongness that was not wrongness, the smell that had not changed in any of the 11 years and would not change in any of the years to come, the smell of her son. "You are home," she said. "I am home," he said into her shoulder. "You will stay with me. Yes. You will not today do another thing alone. Look at me, Harry. Up. You did everything right. Mama, you did everything right. The Diggory boy is the responsibility of the Diggory boy's killer, and the Diggory boy's killer will, in the next hour, be held to account by his mother. Listen to me. You hear me. You did everything right. Say yes." "Yes, Mama." "Good boy. Now hold on to me. The family is coming. They will be on the grounds in 3 hours. Until then, I am here. Until then, I am the only thing that needs to be true." He held on. She held him. The lawn around them moved. People came at them with questions. People came at them with wands. People came at them with the great many small panics of a school that had lost a boy and gained a Cullen in the same 5 minutes. Esme did not stand. She did not turn. She did not let go of her son. She let the people come. She let the people pass. She let the headmaster come in his very tall, thin way and crouch beside the platform and ask in his very gentle, very tired voice, "Mrs. Cullen, where is the thing that took him?" "In a graveyard in Little Hangleton," she said, without taking her cheek off her son's head. "He will be here within the hour. My daughter has seen it. He will come for the boy, and he will come also for the headmaster. You should make your preparations, Dumbledore. He will not, however, take my son. My son will be on the grass at the edge of this maze with me until the thing has been dealt with." The headmaster looked at her for a long moment. "You will deal with it? Yes. You are sure? Yes. You understand what the thing is? I understand what the thing is. You understand that I have spent 50 years preparing to confront it? Yes. You understand that the prophecy, headmaster." She lifted her cheek off her son's head, only for the half-second she needed for what she was about to say. Her gold eyes met his blue. "The prophecy was a prophecy about my son. It was not a prophecy about me. The thing I am about to do is not foreseen in any prophecy in any book in any library you have walked in 50 years, and the reason it is not foreseen is that 994 years ago, when this castle was built, the world had not yet imagined the woman I am. Make your preparations. Do not interfere with mine." She put her cheek back on the crown of her son's head. Dumbledore looked at her for another moment. Then he stood up. Then he turned. Then he walked back across the lawn to the small ring of people at the platform, and he began, in his very gentle, very tired voice, to give the orders he had been preparing to give for 50 years. The headmistress moved. The deputy headmaster moved. A great many other adults moved. The lawn began, in the way a lawn begins to organize itself when an old man with a long beard has begun to issue instructions, to become a lawn that was ready to receive what was coming. Esme rocked her son on the grass. She did not speak. He did not speak. The wind moved over the grass. The moon was past midnight and on its way to its setting. The cup beside them lay quiet and quenched and small. In the air above them, the storm came east. He came in over the lake at 22 minutes past 1. She saw him first. She had known the moment he had passed the wards, the way a mother knows the moment a fever crosses the threshold of 40 degrees, and she had set the boy back very gently against the wooden post of the platform, and she had put one hand on his cheek, and she had said very quietly into his ear, "Stay here, my love. Do not, whatever you hear, look. Close your eyes." He had closed his eyes. She had stood up. She had walked alone to the center of the lawn. She stood on the grass between the platform and the lake, in the moss-colored coat that was the coat she had worn for 2 airplane flights and an ocean crossing and a swim and a run across the spine of Scotland, and she did not even now look out of place. She was, as she had always been, the white plain figure at the center of any picture she stood in. The wind moved her hair. The moon laid its small cold light along her cheek. The thing came in over the lake on a great black serpent of robe and air. It came down the long line of moonlight on the water and across the small ring of boathouses and across the lawn at the speed of an idea that has at last become a thing. And it came to a stop with a soft, inhuman precision, 10 feet in front of her, and it stood on the grass. It was not tall. It was, on the grass in front of her, the height of a thin man. It was the precise height of the man it had once been in the year 1943, before it had spent 50 years stretching itself across 100 deaths and 1,000 betrayals to become the thing it was now. It was noseless. It was hairless. It was the color of milk gone bad. Its eyes were red as the inside of a wound. At her. It looked also past her at the small boy on the platform with his eyes closed and his lightning-marked forehead pressed against the wooden post. It did not speak for a moment. It was used, she understood, to silence. It used silence the way her son used silence, the way Carlyle used silence, the way the headmaster used silence, as a thing to make the other person speak first. She had known the trick of that for 97 years. She did not speak. The thing tilted its head. "You are the vampire," it said. The voice was a thing it would have preferred not to use. The voice was small and dry, and the color of a thing that had been left for a very long time at the bottom of a drawer. It was a voice that had been a man's voice once, and had been refined over 50 years of every quality that made a voice a man's, and what remained was the voice that remained. It was the voice the storm had been making, all along, under all the other sounds the storm had been making for 50 years, and Esme listened to it as a person listens to a wind they have at last been able to hear inside a house. "I am his mother," she said. The thing laughed. It was the laugh of a thing that had not had occasion to laugh in a long time and had remembered in the moment that laughter was something one did with the throat. It was a thin, dry, hairless laugh. The teeth in the laugh were small and very white and very even in the way the teeth of a thing that had ordered the design of its own teeth would be. "His mother is dead," the thing said. "His mother is in front of you. I killed his mother. You killed the one before me. I am the next. You will not kill another." The thing tilted its head the other way. "You are a creature," it said. "You are a thing made of dead human flesh. You feed on the blood of living animals. You have no soul that any god of any country recognizes. You have no business in this conversation. Stand aside." "No," she said. She did not raise her voice. She had not, in 11 years as a mother, ever raised her voice, and she did not raise it now. The word she said was the word she had said to the boy at the kitchen table when he had reached for the second piece of toast he did not want. And it was the word she had said to Rosalie in the garage when Rosalie had asked, for the third time in a winter, whether they ought to move. And it was the word she would say in many small, unimportant moments in the years to come. She used it now without inflection. She used it as if the matter had been settled before she had said it. She did not move. The thing's slit-pupil eyes narrowed. It raised its wand. It said the word it had said in a small wooden house in Godric's Hollow 11.5 years before. The green light came out of the end of the wand. The green light did not reach her. It did not reach her because, in the half-second between the word and the light, she had crossed the 10 feet of grass between them and had put her hand around the thing's wand, and had broken it, between her thumb and her forefinger, the way she would break a dry twig she was using to stir a pot of soup. And the green light, having no wand to come out of, did not come out of anything, and the green light unmade itself in the air between them in a small green sigh that fell to the grass and went out. The thing looked at the snapped pieces of the wand in her palm. It looked at the small, calm gold eyes of the vampire mother in front of it. It did not understand for a half-second what had happened. In that half-second she put her left hand around its throat. She did not crush. She did not yet crush. She was, even now, gentle. She had been gentle her whole life, and she did not stop being gentle for this. She only became, in this moment, the kind of gentle she had not previously had occasion to be. The thing tried with the small, cold, long fingers to pull her hand from its throat. The fingers did not move her hand. Her hand was the hand of a vampire who had been Esme Cullen for 97 years, and the fingers of the thing in front of her were the fingers of a man who had spent 50 years convincing himself he was no longer a man, and the difference between her hand and his fingers was the difference between the rock and the small water that runs over it for a long time without ever wearing it down. She lifted, very slightly, with the hand, and the feet of the thing came up off the grass. It hung from her hand. It looked at her. For a half-second it forgot to be the thing it had become. It became, in the wet red eyes, briefly, the boy who had been Tom Riddle, the orphan in the small room at the top of the orphanage, the small, clever, cruel child who had been frightened, very young, of the small, clever, cruel things he was learning to do, and had not, in any of the decades since, allowed himself to be that boy again. He was that boy now. He was held in the air over the grass of Hogwarts by the hand of a woman whose son's life he had once tried to end, and he was looking, through the wet red eyes of the thing he had become, at the woman, and the woman was looking back, and what she saw in his eyes was the small, frightened child who had grown into the thing in her hand. She did not soften. She had been a mother for 11 years, and she had seen, in that time, exactly enough of the small, frightened children of the world to know that what made a small, frightened child into a kind man was the choice of a small, frightened child to be kind, and that what made a small, frightened child into the thing in her hand was the choice of a small, frightened child not to be. She did not soften. She had compassion for the boy in the wet red eyes, and she had compassion for the woman who had been his mother, and the compassion did not change her hand. "You will not," she said, very quietly, very gently, "touch my son again. Not in this life. Not in the next. Not in any." The thing tried to speak. It could not. She closed her hand. It was not a great violence. It was not a thing of theater. It was the small, precise, gentle closing of a hand that had, in 11 years, learned to do exactly what it intended to do and no more. And the hand of Esme Cullen at the throat of Lord Voldemort closed, on the grass at Hogwarts at 23 minutes past 1 in the morning on the 25th of June in the year 1995. And the thing that had called itself the flight from death came apart, in her hand, into the small, dry pieces of a thing that had spent 50 years refusing to die, and was, in the small mercy of her closing fingers, finally permitted to. The pieces fell to the grass. The body of the thing fell with them, slack and small and emptied. The wind moved over the grass. The moon, on its long ride down the western sky, did not pause. Esme stood on the grass for 3 seconds with her hand still raised, and she opened the hand, and the small dry pieces of what had been Lord Voldemort fell out of it, and she turned, and she walked back across the lawn to the platform, and she crouched beside her son, and she put her hand on his cheek. "It is done, my love." He opened his eyes, he looked at her. He looked past her at the small empty robe on the grass and at the small dry pieces that had fallen from her hand, and then he looked back at her. "Mama, yes, yes." He did not weep. He had not wept in the graveyard. He had not wept on the lawn. He had not wept since she had come around behind him at the platform and put her hand between his shoulder blades. The tears came now. They came in the small, clean way that tears come from a 14-year-old boy who has been carrying, for an hour, a weight he was not built for, and who has been told in 3 syllables that he may put it down. He put it down. He put his arms around her. "You came," he said. "I came. Mama, you came. I will always come." She held him on the grass at the edge of the maze, in the cold blue moonlight of the small hour after midnight, and behind her on the lawn, the headmaster was crouching beside the small dry pieces and looking at them with the very tired blue eyes of a man who had just understood that 50 years of his preparation had been overtaken in 3 seconds by a thing he had not foreseen and could not have foreseen. The headmistress was looking also. The deputy was looking. The handful of others around them were looking. None of them spoke. None of them came near. They had understood, on a level that did not need words, that the woman on the grass with her son was a private thing and would be private for a while longer, and they let her be. The family arrived on the lawn at 4 minutes past 4 in the morning. They had landed at Inverness an hour and 20 minutes before. They had driven, the 7 of them in 2 black cars, at a speed the small narrow roads of the Highlands had not yet been built for, and they came down the long hill of Hogsmeade and across the bridge and up the path to the castle, and they came onto the lawn in the order they had come onto every lawn for 40 years, with Carlyle first and Rosalie and Emmett behind him and Alice and Jasper behind them and Edward at the rear, because Edward had heard before any of the others that the thing was done. Carlyle crossed the lawn at the speed of an ordinary man walking. He came to the platform. He looked at Esme on the grass with the boy in her arms. He crouched. He put one hand on the boy's back and one hand on Esme's shoulder. He did not speak. He did not need to. The other 5 came around the platform. Rosalie sat on the grass on the other side of the boy. Emmett put his hand on the wooden post of the platform and stood, as he had stood 10 years before at the kitchen chair, with his palm flat on the wood and his whole weight a kind of promise. Alice sat on the grass behind Esme. Jasper stood beside Alice. Edward stood at the foot of the platform with his hands in his coat pockets and his gold eyes on his brother, and the look on Edward's face was not a look the family had seen on his face before, and was a look that would, in the years to come, be the look Edward had at his brother for the rest of their long lives. The boy did not move from Esme's arms. "Family," he said into her shoulder. "Yes, my love. You are all here. We are all here. Mama, yes. I would like to go home." She put her cheek against the crown of his head. "Yes," she said. "We will go home. The school will keep until autumn. The world will keep until then also. You will come home tomorrow, and you will sleep in your bed in the small room on the ground floor, and you will hear the river through the window the way you have heard it all your life, and you will get up in the morning, and your Carlyle will make you coffee that you will pretend to like, and your Edward will play you the lullaby that he has, perhaps, by now, finished. You will eat the soup your sister has been making for 14 years. You will climb the cliff with your brother. You will walk down to the river with me in your bare feet, and we will take for the jar a stone. Yes, Mama, you will be home. I will be home." The wind moved over the grass. The moon was at the western edge of the sky. The small dry pieces on the grass behind them had begun, in the way of such things, to be carried away by the wind, one by one, into the long dark country of the Highlands, and would by morning be gone. Esme stood up. She lifted her son into her arms. He was 14 years old. He was the height of her shoulder. He was a boy she had carried out of a clearing in a wet wood 11.5 years before in a moss-colored sweater, and he was the boy she would carry, in the small, impossible mothering of the night, across the lawn of a castle in the Highlands of Scotland to the cars waiting on the path beyond. He let her carry him. He had grown up a kind boy, and the kindness in him was the kindness of a child who had understood from very young that the motherings were for her as much as for him. And on the night the world had at last asked of his mother the thing it had asked of no other mother in any country in any century, he let her carry him because he understood, on a level that did not need words, that she needed it. The family walked together across the lawn. The cars were on the path. The path went down the long hill to Hogsmeade, and to the road that led to the airport at Inverness, and to the white jet on the small black runway that would carry the 8 of them home across the dark sea, and back to the white house on the river road in the small wet country at the edge of the continent where, in the green hour of a morning some 12 hours hence, the boy in Esme's arms would climb the porch steps in his bare feet and stand at the screen door he had stood at the day he had been born into his second life, and the door would creak at the top hinge, the way it had creaked for 15 years, because Esme Cullen, mother, had still never asked her husband to fix it. She had liked the sound. It told her when her family came home. Chapter 7 End.